Okay, first of all, Madam Secretary, please note for the record that all council members are here with the exception of Mr. Balknight. With that, I will now open the meeting.
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I'd like to welcome citizens tonight, and I will tell you that we're in a far different world than we were 2 weeks ago when we had our last meeting. And you will note that there's going to be some changes for the immediate future in how we conduct our meetings. But we're going to do so to try to follow the recommended recommendations of the CDC as far as social separation, although I like Dr. Shepard's reference to it, more of a physical separation, because socially we still need to stay together as a community. So as we move forward, have patience with us. We're going to try to, everything we do is going to try to have our meetings with the knowledge that the public still needs to be a participant in these meetings, and whether it's physical or later, you'll learn other methods to participate. So moving along, we have some communications, and those have been put on hold for now. And now we're going into some announcements and reminders, and I think there's a couple of proclamations that we may want to read. And then I think, Mr. Goose, you want to have a talk about the new setup.
Yes, sir. If I may, before we go into the proclamations, just a quick notice about the teleconferencing option on tonight's meeting. Mayor and council members, you'll notice that we have some additional video cameras in the room tonight for video conferencing. We want Victoria residents to know that they can still participate in today's citizen communication segment through a video conferencing option, even without being present. We've set up this option in light of CDC and the White House's recommendation to limit public gatherings of 10 or more people. When accessing the video conference call, we're going to ask you that citizens make sure that their computers are muted or whatever other device they may be using so that we're not hearing background noise until the appropriate section of the meeting. If you're seeking to access this meeting via video conference, here's how you can do it. You can visit www.zoom.com from your web browser and select Join a Meeting located at the top of the browser. You can input the code 361-485-3146 as the meeting ID. Then you'll select Join followed by Open Zoom and then Join with Video. You can click on the icon labeled Participants to access the option Raise Hand at the bottom of the screen. Once you click on Raise Hand, our moderator will announce you by your username that you've selected, and that'll be your cue to begin addressing council. As with our citizens who are here in person, we ask that you limit your comments to 5 minutes or less. Thank you. I'll have more information, Mayor and council members, about teleconferencing and some recent changes to the law later in this meeting. But for now, Mayor, as you've asked, I'll move into proclamations. The first is a proclamation for Fair Housing Month, and it reads in part, whereas Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, as amended, prohibits discrimination in housing and declares it a national policy to provide within constitutional limits for fair housing in the United States. And whereas the principle of fair housing is not only the national law and national policy, but a fundamental human concept and entitlement for all Americans. Now, therefore, we, the City Council of the City of Victoria, do proclaim April as Fair Housing Month in the City of Victoria, and do hereby urge all citizens of this locality to become aware of and support the fair housing law. And this was passed and adopted today on the 17th day of April, and it is signed by Mayor Raleigh McCoy. I understand, Mayor and Council, that there is not someone here today to receive this proclamation, but we will make sure that it is delivered appropriately. The second proclamation, excuse me, I promise it's just allergies, has to do with the Strength in Autism Awareness Day, and it is also signed today by Raleigh McCoy, Mayor of the City of Victoria, and it reads in part, whereas Crossroads Autism Network was founded in 2016 as a nonprofit organization to provide community awareness and a network for families with loved ones in the autism spectrum. And whereas the Crossroads Autism Network is made up of volunteers who dedicate their time to providing community inclusion and fun-filled, safe mini-events for families with children on the autism spectrum, their board and volunteers striving to bring support and celebrations to families and celebrate their strengths. Now, therefore, I, Raleigh McCoy, Mayor of the City of Victoria, Texas, do hereby declare April 2nd, 2020 to be Strength in Autism Awareness Day in Victoria, Texas. And Mayor, I understand there's not anyone to receive this proclamation either. We will make sure they are delivered appropriately.
Thank you. I think we'll move on. I think we have Mr. David Gonzalez, our Public Health Director, who is here to give us an update on the COVID-19 situation.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mayor, Council. Good evening. Just kind of want to give a high-level overview of current situation. Hopefully, most of the folks here and on watching at home have been in tune to the 3 o'clock press conferences, been monitoring our Facebook, Victoria County Public Health Department Facebook, as well as Victoria TX OEM to get the latest updates. But I'll go ahead and give a little briefing this evening as well. Current situation, we're roughly a little over 4,200 cases of COVID-19 in the United States. We're at 64 cases in Texas, and currently we're at 0 confirmed cases in Victoria. As you may have seen last night and on Sunday as well, there's new guidance set forth for public gatherings and mass gatherings. Right now, the advice from the CDC is going to be for the public to limit to 50, less than 50 persons at one gathering for the next 8 weeks. That was further, clarified or directed, is further directed at that time to give guidance to less than 10, as the mayor mentioned earlier, or more for the next 15 days. So it's current guidance, and as we've seen the past few days, that changes day to day, hour to hour. Just as we're about to get the press briefing yesterday, walking in at the 50 or less guideline, and we'd heard on the news that right at that point in time that it went to 10. So just keep in mind it's a fluid situation, changes rapidly, and just at this point, just know we're adapting as things change. As far as lab testing has been a topic that's come up several times. Providers here continue to collect samples. The health department as well is directing and issuing guidance on the collection of samples and lab tests being confirmed or being performed. We are currently doing that. There have been tests performed for Victoria County residents, but I will not comment on the exact number of those. The good news is we continue to have those private labs come on board on a regular basis. In the last few days, I think LabCorp, Quest, and a few others have done so on a national level. So that's really increasing our lab testing capabilities, which is definitely a great plus. That's apart from, I guess, probably 2 weeks ago, the update may have been at that time, that we just had the public labs on board, and testing capability through those public labs were very limited at that time. Just want to again encourage, we did open up a hotline yesterday. I believe it was the first day of the public health hotline that is actually manned through the Emergency Operations Center. And the number for that hotline is 361-580-5796. And that is open from 8 to 12 and then 1 to 5 during the week. If the situation warrants where that's going to need to be manned after hours, then we will review at that time and perhaps extend those hours if needed. Also, like I mentioned earlier, you go to victoriatxoem.org for current information, the Victoria County Public Health Department Facebook, and then also tune into the 3 o'clock press conferences that I know are broadcast live through the Health Department Facebook, the City Facebook, County Facebook, and probably the Advocate Facebook as well. So it's a great way to get current updates of the situation as things unfold. That's all I had for now, and open up for questions if anybody has any questions for me.
I just have a comment. Is there any way we can get the press conference on Channel 15? There's a lot of older people that don't use the internet. And if it was on TV, it would be easier for them to see.
Sure. Do you mean live?
Or
just in general?
Well, it would be nice if it was live, but if you recorded it and just ran it that day for that day.
Sure. We can look at doing that.
Is it not on TV now, on 15?
It is?
Okay. When is it on?
We even have gotten them to schedule it. It used to just say city programming,
Right, but
but
it says, but when do you run
Do
it
you know,
now?
do you
it's,
know
it
what time it comes
varies.
on?
It's often,
Around 6 PM?
Okay.
Okay.
but
That
then
would be good
it's,
if we put that somewhere so
Sure.
people would know.
We'll put it out there. We'll do a better job of
be
communicating
great.
that it'll replay at 6 PM on Channel 15.
That would be good.
and then for clarification, it plays more than once. It plays
it's on a
every
loop.
day, several times.
Okay. But we'll confirm and we'll get a schedule out to you and the public.
Thank you.
David, are there any guidelines for the testing? Let's say a person's running a low-grade fever. Should they seek their physician? Should they just stay at home and quarantine themselves until they have other symptoms in that regard to contact? Or if they don't have one, go to contact the emergency room prior to going? Is there any guidelines that you guys have for that?
Yeah, in general, what we're trying to encourage folks, obviously seek out their medical provider first and foremost. If they do have symptoms of fever, any kind of cough, sore throat, that goes along with that. Obviously, it's allergy season, so you hear a lot of us around here, coughing and things. So that's to be aware, and that's the point of going to that medical provider, so they can do proper assessments. If they need to run a flu test, a strep test, maybe any allergy tests as well, they can kind of rule those out first. And then since we're still somewhat limited across the state, across the country, with lab testing capabilities for COVID-19, we're trying to rule those out first until, and then if that point, they identify a need, and then they go and recommend that at that time. And obviously, and we're encouraging heavily, if you're sick, stay home from work. You'll see, here at council, we're doing temperature checks. We're doing the same at the Emergency Operations Center. I know some city and county departments are doing that as well. As a health department, we're getting ready to enact that also to do those temperature checks to really protect the population and keep those folks that are ill out of those situations, out of those offices and facilities.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
David, you said the 10 or less gathering was for the next 15 days only?
Yes, ma'am. That was part of the plan through the president's, address yesterday. The idea was 15 days to slow the spread is the plan of action there. And to really avoid, the guidance specifically is to avoid social gatherings for the public. The guidance directly to the public, was to avoid social gatherings of 10 or more. It's not direct, it's not directed to, as far as enforceability on our end, but it's really more of a guidance at that point. Same with the 50 or less for the next 8 weeks as well. Right now, currently, again, no confirmed cases. If we get to the point where we start seeing widespread community transmission, we discussed this, I think at the press conference yesterday, as far as kind of our plan of action and how those things progress, then we'll look at other, a little more firm measures, calls to action by the community. But right now, there are just suggestions to do that.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey, any further questions? Thank you very much. I know how long your day is, so thank you for being here.
I'd like to thank you. You're doing a super job, as is everybody, and keeping us informed. Thank you very much.
Definitely a team effort. Thank you.
Okay, with
With that,
that,
Mr. Mayor, I would like to thank the public. I know we've had some strong recommendations for the decreased gatherings, but many of the institutions here have done their part to either cancel, postpone events, and it could be weddings as well. So I do appreciate those doing their part of our community to prevent the spread as well.
yeah, and that's what is so refreshing. We've gotten positive response when we've asked people to cooperate, and it's been amazing to me how willing people are to sacrifice their own interests for the interest of everyone else. And so we should commend this community and hope that we continue to act as the community we are. So thank you, Doctor.
I agree.
Mayor, may I add a couple of points?
Yes.
I just want to reiterate what we also announced yesterday and will continue to announce, which is, of course, that all events at the library have been canceled and postponed, as well as events at park facilities. We'll be sending out some press releases tomorrow with more details on how our residents can pay their water bill over the phone or online, and the same for their municipal court fine. We want them to pay that. And there'll be some more information put out over the next day or two on how we're limiting some of our operations to account for the recommendations that are coming from CDC. And so I just want to remind you and the public of those, predominantly the cancellations at the library and park facilities. And I think, I would agree to your point, staff has spoken to all of the private event organizers, community center, I mean, people that have weddings, quinceañeras, planned, and everybody has been very understanding and receptive to the fact that they're just gonna have to reschedule. And so I think everybody's really taking this seriously as they should.
Thank you. Now we'll move on to items from council. I think, Mr. Lofgren, you have an item.
Yeah, presently the speed limit in residential areas of the city is 30 miles per hour. And I think that's way too fast. I'd like the rest of the council to discuss, but I would like it lowered to 25. I understand there'll be a cost for signs, and I really would like the signs as you enter the neighborhoods, because if you drive 30 miles an hour through a neighborhood, you're going way too fast. And so I'd like the rest of council to comment on it, or I'd like to know how they
It might be
feel.
good to allow Ken an opportunity to address a few points that could be beneficial for the discussion.
And Mayor, if you don't mind, I think Ken Gill and I are going to tag team this presentation. I've got a few items before he gets into the practical local considerations to discuss why signs are a consideration even in the first place. Council, I just want to remind you that the Transportation Code establishes a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit in urban districts unless the community raises or lowers that speed limit. So the default is 30 miles an hour in an urban district around the state, unless it is posted otherwise. Cities, of course, may alter by ordinance the prima facie speed limit. That's also from the Transportation Code. And you know that we have done that. We have a transportation schedule that lists both raised speed limits and lowered speed limits. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that unless we have made a change on the speed limit schedule, and unless there is a sign posted at that location, the default is 30 miles an hour. And so that results in many locations around town where there may not be a sign because the speed limit is 30 miles an hour anywhere there is not a sign. At the entrance of my neighborhood, for example, there is no sign saying what the speed limit is, nor is there, I think, anywhere else in my neighborhood. And so that may, if council chooses to change the speed limit within those areas, result in some traffic studies or signage that need to be done. And that is, I think, what Ken would like to address tonight.
Okay. One of the things that for doing a speed limit, and it's a speed study, whether it's a residential or a collector or an arterial, is they call it the 85th percentile speed. And that's based on 85% of the motorists traveling at a reasonable and safe speed. So you'll see TxDOT before they open up a road, and as we do, you'll do a speed study. You'll have somebody out there taking radar, checking traffic, and getting 85% of what the traveling motorist does. As we proceed with this, we'd want to do that on some of these residential streets or local streets to determine what is the actual speed that 85 percentile is going based on their prudent speed and the conditions of the road. Other things you'd want to do is an engineering study to determine, is there a curve that's unsafe? Is the road real narrow? Is there a lot of conflict points? What are the volumes of the road? Is there a school nearby? Of course, we do reduce the speed limit by the school. That's all guidelines by the MUTCD, which is a federal guideline that sets speed limits, gives guidance for traffic control. To get to the cost and things, I know that's an issue, and signage, we would need to look at each neighborhood on an individual case, one at a time, to determine sign placement. Merely putting a sign in the front of the neighborhood doesn't get that person who's in the back of the neighborhood leaving and doesn't see a 30-mile-an-hour sign. So you need to place them in a lot of spots in each roadway. So and a sign cost is approximately $400 a sign. They're got to be made. They have to be on a breakaway pole, certain conditions. That's the gist of it. There's a lot more to setting speeds, but we can sure address that. And as Thomas said, right now our ordinance sets reduce speed limits by street. So we would need to do that. If we go on a phasing type program, we'd need to reset the speed ordinance and designate each street by speed. And I'll address any other questions.
$400 for a sign? Is that the sign and the pole?
That's the sign, the pole, the
pole.
time, and the mounting. Yes, sir.
I'd like to know how many signs. There's 105 neighborhoods. I counted them in the street inventory, roughly.
Okay.
Okay, I could be off. And some of them are one entrance, one exit. I would like to know how much it would cost to lower the speed limit to 25 miles an hour
For
all the neighborhoods.
105 neighbors. We can do that. We can
I
sure.
mean, we really can't discuss until we know how much it costs.
Okay. That's fair.
I don't know why you have to do an engineering study if you're gonna lower the speed limit.
Which you want to make it enforceable, because anytime you set a speed that's unreasonable or not prudent to the 85th percentile, it can be difficult to enforce. In other words, I give an example. If you set the freeway speed of Loop 463 at 35 miles an hour, that's going to be hard for a judge to defend, because the reasonable safe speed of that highway is faster than 35. So that's why you want to prepare engineering studies and look at that 85th percentile to verify it is enforceable for the public.
I think,
Well, oh, go ahead.
I think that's kind of where my brain is having trouble with this too. I was going to ask, what's the definition of a neighborhood? And just then, Councilmember Loughran said there are 105 of them. Well, is that like a named neighborhood? Like, I'm going to pick Ben Jordan, Riata, or Waterstone, or Oak Haven. Those are really clear neighborhoods.
Right.
But there are a lot of other areas that we might consider neighborhoods that are not that obvious. And so I'm sort of in a mixture. I understand what you're saying, that we need to know what whatever the 85 percentile speed is, because if there's houses on both sides, but it's more of a collector street, or maybe collectors or neighborhoods, that's where I'm having a little bit of problem with just saying, yes, let's consider lowering the speed limit, and that's where I understand why that study's
Right.
needed.
Well, I'm not suggesting lowering the street on collectors or thoroughfares. And if there was a collector that ran through a neighborhood, that would be a different story. But in neighborhoods, most neighborhoods don't have, most neighborhoods don't have collectors that run through them. Of the 105 that I've looked at in the street inventory, there are some, but I'm not talking about collectors. Residential streets.
So are you saying
Are there
105
specific-
street?
Are there specific neighborhoods that you have concern with? It might be helpful for us to get a feel
Well,
for
let
what
me,
the
let me
priorities
give you an
are.
example. North Crest. The other thing this would stop is people cutting through neighborhoods. If you lowered the speed limit, right now people cut through streets on North Crest because they want to avoid the school zones. Well, if it was 25 miles an hour, it's pretty much what a school zone is, or close to it. People would tend to use the thoroughfares. My neighborhood, I live in Castle Hills West. People used to, and they still do, cut through on King Arthur, okay? They don't go 30 miles an hour. And even if they went 30 miles an hour, it's too fast.
So it sounds like the priority are neighborhoods that might be cut-through neighborhoods.
I think that would be the first thing I would want to,
Okay. Because that really helps narrow kind of the scope a little bit.
I would want to look at, but those are where you have the speed problems. If it's a neighborhood where there's only one exit and one entrance,
Right.
people don't tend to, they're not going to drive through fast. But there are neighborhoods that have cut-throughs, and those cut-throughs, people are using them because they can just drive whatever speed they want. I think if we lowered the speed limit in some of those neighborhoods, that you would avoid the cut-throughs, and it would be safer for the people that live in those neighborhoods. Plus, I don't think anybody drives 30 miles an hour in some of the neighborhoods. They drive a lot faster.
And we can set out.
That's what the speed study would tell us, right?
Right, that's what the speed study, and as Jan was pointing out, there are different, it's not just the
Okay.
general term of collector, there is a residential collector. For instance, Kingsway is not defined as a pure collector,
Right.
but it is a residential collector because that is the cul-de-sac streets may go towards Kingsway to get out of the neighborhood. So there's levels of collector, there's levels of arterials, and so that would be, we don't break our classifications down that far.
Okay, I have a question. Right now, in the last legislature, there were two bills. They did not make it to the floor, but they were to lower residential speed limits to 25. If that had happened, what would the city have done?
We would have followed those rules. It was House Bill 1287, is that the one you're referring,
Believe so.
and Senate Bill 1023?
Right.
And I
For
guess,
now, if we could look at the neighborhoods where people cut through,
Right.
because those residents have a problem with people driving fast through their neighborhoods. And
Well, and one,
If I might, from my perspective, I think there's enough understanding here of the intent of what we're looking for. And Ken, I've known
Okay.
you a long time, and you've got a lot of experience. And I would trust you to use your
Sure.
judgment to look at these neighborhoods. You understand what the neighborhood I live in, for instance, you enter one deal and it's one long shot. There's no deals, and you know the areas that those types of situations observe. And so if you could just take your knowledge and give us a rough estimate of the amount of signage in a few of these neighborhoods and bring us back just a rough estimate of the kind of money that we're looking at, and then we can determine if it's something that we need to pursue, if it's within
Sure.
reason. Does that make sense?
That makes sense.
Because you have the knowledge. I
And
know
one
you
thing
do.
we've done, and we've set the speed signs out there that show the speed you're going. And we've actually, in some cases, hidden them so the people don't see them. And that gives a real good idea of, do we have an issue out on a lot of the residential streets? So we can still be placing those out, get them out of the public eye, because I know people see them and they automatically sometimes slow down, sometimes they speed up.
But again, I think that would give us
Sure.
information to know whether it's worth pursuing right now, whether it makes sense. And then the other avenue we would have is go back to the legislature, and they would solve our problem for us.
Right.
But I think instead of going too far too fast, I trust your judgment,
We
quite
can
frankly.
I can look at Northcrest, for instance, the whole, basically, the whole section, and get an idea of number of signs.
I would,
Go ahead.
I would also like to have us proceed slowly on this and make sure those neighborhoods that we're talking about have a chance to think about this. I don't really want it to be a case of the government has decided that your speed limit should be lowered. I'd like to make sure those neighborhoods are aware.
No, I was going
fair.
to mention as far as the road, Lilac is a perfect example. That road is so wide between Sam Houston, back to the Primrose, and it's a straight shot. So I do know that people accelerate much faster than 30. So there is a safety issue, but I do agree that there probably needs to be some studies looked at that.
Okay,
But
I
I'm quite
drive slow anyway, so I'm good.
right.
quite happy.
Your children are
Initial
safe.
Studies coming from your office, to be quite frank. Is
Yeah,
that-
well, I'd like to see it actually broken down, the cost per neighborhood, because not every neighborhood's gonna need this, and if you give us one cost of the whole city, that's not gonna be accurate of what we need to address. I mean, not like a cost for Northcrest, the cost specifically for Castle Hills, cost specifically for Country Club. I think doing the whole city is not reasonable.
And I think that's something we can do in our office, is pick some selected neighborhoods, bring them up, get a map together, show where those signs would go, where they need to be to make it so it's an enforceable thing and people know as they're coming in at the neighborhood or leaving the neighborhood that they understand it's 25 miles an hour. And we can put some maps together, get some estimates of how many signs, for instance, in Castle Hills, Northcrest, Lilac Street. What are we talking about as far as costs?
That would be great.
One other question is the concern that they're actually driving faster than 30? That perhaps posting signs that say 30 which are not required, but perhaps in some of those places that would be something to consider.
But
It still
30
costs
is,
$400.
30
It
is,
still costs $400.
yeah, it still
But it
costs
doesn't-
$400, and 30 is too fast.
But it just doesn't lead to, if we lower it in some areas and not in others, then it gets very confusing.
Well, let's find out how much it costs,
Sure.
and then we can go from there. But if you drive 30 miles an hour through a residential, you put your car in cruise control and drive 30 miles an hour, and you tell me that that's a safe speed, it's not a safe speed. We look forward to your.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, we're going to move on to the second item in items from council. Is really my item. And Ms. Stafford and Jenny, would you please step forward? Before you begin, I want to kind of apologize to you. At the last meeting, I sort of appeared to cut you off, but my frustration was that without you on the agenda, we could not converse with you. And I wanted to know a little bit more about it, and I wanted to set up a situation where we could ask questions back and forth, because the subject that you bring to us is extremely important. And I would argue that it's even more important today than it was 2 weeks ago. So if you want to spend, I can tell you one of my first things that I wanted to ask you, you passed out some information that showed some official count that was a lot lower than what you actually counted.
Right, right.
And I think if you could explain that again, of why that is that way and why we should rely on your numbers more, I would appreciate it.
Mayor, I'll accept your apology if you'll accept mine, because I didn't realize till I got home and watched on Channel 15 how I just got wound up like a top and didn't stop. And you said, whoa. And then I realized I had rambled on. But it's really hard right now to come in and talk about a problem that was, considering what we're looking at today, but I'm going to do my best to stay on topic and stick to my 4 points that I have in front of me. But on January the 23rd, we did the official, what we call the point in time, and you're right, the number at the top of the page reflects what we counted that day. The procedure to do that is to use volunteers and staff members and anybody in the community to locate homeless people or people who identify as homeless. We go to the Price Kitchen, we go to the library, we go to VCAM, we go any place that we know that we can probably find people. And you do this little, it's not a short survey, it's a pretty intensive survey. It's an app on your phone, which then gets, all that information gets sent to Texas Homeless Network. They aggregate it all and send it on to HUD. There's some problems with that, always, but we had some real problems this year because one thing, the weather had been, had a terribly rainy day the day before, and so a lot of the campsites got washed out. A lot of homeless people are not always compliant. When they know there's a homeless count, sometimes they hide, and they are concerned about privacy issues and why we're snooping around in their business. So we always have some built-in factors, and like I mentioned last time, we had a TV news crew following us around. If anybody else, anything will scatter a room, I can promise you it's a camera and a great big microphone. And so we had a lot of issues that day. So if you'll look at the top of that chart, what we found is that there were 59 people living in shelters, and I listed the shelters that were counted that day. We had 85 people who said they were not living under a roof anywhere. They were living in the street, in a car, in an abandoned building, or any place that HUD considers not fit for human habitation. We knew that number was low, and so we began going through our files. At Midcoast, we have a couple of different services where we interact with people who live on the street, and one of them is at our day center, where they can come in and shower. We help them get signed up for benefits. We enroll them. Whatever they need, we try to meet their need. One of the really cool things, just as a PS, Meals on Wheels brings us their leftover food at the end of the day, and we serve their leftovers, which is, we can stick it in the microwave, and they're very happy to get a warm meal. So on the day that this happened, we had 188 people enrolled. And I can tell you that number is not duplicated. The system that we use is called Osnium, and it's a nationally known database, and the purpose is to deduplicate individuals. So if you start putting somebody in and you enter birthdays and gender and some of that basic information, it's going to deduplicate it for us, and that's the purpose of it. But we also know there were another 24 people that we interacted with and enrolled in services at our warming shelter. When we did that a couple of times this year. And then another 25 that we know just from our outreach efforts, going to street corners and encampments and different places. So we have 237 homeless people on our books. And I can tell you since January, we've housed about 20 of these people. A few of them were veterans. We were always eager to move them to the top of our list. So right now, currently, if we round it off, I'd say there's probably 210 people living on the street. And I don't know about you, but that always shocks me because they do a pretty good job of staying hidden. Most of them are not going to be out in the public eye. And so it's always a staggering number to see. You know, the 80 maybe, the 210 is a little bit surprising. So we believe at Midcoast that the answer to homelessness is housing. They need a lot of support services and they need a lot of community services, but the main thing they need is a roof over their head so they can start no longer being homeless. So we are active in providing that. I'm sure you're tired of hearing me talk about our services, but we have 42 rental units that we pay the rent. We get money from HUD to pay the rent. And it's a program called Permanent Supportive Housing. And it's designed for people who are the most difficult to serve because mental health issues, addiction, physical issues, just a long time on the street. So we've got 42 units, but we got approved at the last time I was here, I told you we got approved for another 14. Since then, we've gotten approved for another 14. And it's like a big gulp. It's like, yay, we got approved for more funding. We got more funding for more units, and oh dear, we got funding for more units because it's hard to find that many more units. It's going to be a challenge for us to find 28 more rental units, but we're committed to doing that. One of our concerns is our match money. HUD has a pretty stiff match requirement. Right now, we're paying $50,000 in cash match. HUD likes us to pay that first. We pay our bills with the HUD money before we or with our match money before we tap into the HUD money. Our match is going to go from $50,000 to $123,000. I don't know how they do the math, but it definitely works in their favor. $123,969. The good news is that United Way helps us with about $40,000 of that match. We're hopeful that will continue. We're in the process right now of applying for United Way funds. We use thrift store funds. We use some of our fundraising money that we get, but it's a big hunk of money. And the reason for that is HUD just feels like communities need to ante up. If they believe in services to help support homeless, that they should ante up to help to do that. So that was my presentation from 2 weeks ago, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Well, there's one thing I would like to ask, and I haven't had an opportunity to talk to this even with the city manager or anything, but I want to share some of my observations. I was asked to give opening remarks at a event about a week ago that had to do with pathways to affordable housing and things. And there was a particular presentation in that program that was Bethany Castro gave, where she described, she's the head of Perpetual Home, is it?
Help Home, yes, sir.
Of their actual residents, and she referred to three of these residents in terms of resident A, B, C, and showed the real financial situation of people that struggle to live at so much an hour and what the costs are to live here and what they have at the end of the thing. And I think if that could somehow be shared in our conversations as we move forward to put some reality into some of these general discussions of the issue. And the other thing that surprised me, I was given by staff a spreadsheet that showed what we as a city have spent in block grant funds over for 10 years. The city has put $2,158,000 and some change into these programs. So I would ask that we somehow get feedback from you folks that are out there on the front lines every day, and let's review what we're doing with that money and make sure that we're getting our best bang for our buck with this money. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
So that we know if we need to restructure. I know there's some limitations that they put on the certain expenditures, but I think if we were more interactive in analyzing those funds, it would help us when we seek those funds to make sure that we're getting funds that are targeted in the right direction. And that's one thing I would like to see. And lastly, given the situation we're in now with the COVID virus deal, that's another one of our at-risk, and I call them at-risk citizens because they're citizens of our community. And I think today at the press conference, the judge and myself made it abundantly clear that we have an obligation to take care of those that are most vulnerable in our community as well. And so it's gonna, I know that Mr. Garza has set up our two assistant city managers as liaisons with the various groups, and it includes the groups we're talking about, those that feed the hungry, a lot of nonprofits, and we need to get busy and make sure that we have a flow of information so that we can assure that what resources we have, which are limited, there's no doubt about it, are used most effectively in protecting these populations. So that's what I would like to see moving forward, and I thank you for coming back this evening. And my message is let's work harder together and see what we can do as a community to deal with the situation. Thank you.
You're welcome, thank you.
Okay, moving on, I think the next item is mine as well. Mr. Goosh, I think I would like an explanation. I heard, different people asking why there's some apparent game rooms in operation in Victoria, since we had the initial kind of regulation to them and the county then subsequently banned them. And so I know you have the explanation, and I'd like you to give it.
Yes, sir. As a quick reminder to those who may be watching on television, remember that the city had game room regulations in place for the last several years, particularly ramping up over the last year of operation to try to limit the number of game rooms in our community. And then the state legislature stepped in with some assistance by allowing counties to regulate game rooms and have higher penalty provisions than we could provide. And so when the county chose to regulate game rooms, we chose to allow them and support them in that effort. I spoke just today with Chief Deputy Roy Boyd about the current state of the county game room regulation. As you know, they passed that regulation in December to be effective January 1. As of today, they have their application process complete and ready to go. They have several applications that they're aware of being written. They're aware of one that is either on the verge of being submitted or may have actually been submitted by the end of the day today. But as of today, there are 0 approved game rooms within the county of Victoria. Now, I know there are several businesses operating that have game machines in them. City Secretary Helbrick just pointed out a list of them to me today. There are at least 3, possibly 4, that are operating what they consider to be a boutique. And I think that's really the origin of this question. Why do we have these boutiques operating in our community if we have banned game rooms? And the answer is that the county's regulation is based on state law, particularly in the definition of what is a game room. And the state law definition of what is a game room is any game room that has 6 or more machines. So if there are 5 or fewer machines operating in that facility, it is not a game room, and it is not subject to the county's regulation. Now, what's interesting is that The city regulation that we put on the books years ago was never focused on eliminating the one or two machines you might see in a gas station. We were focused on the larger game rooms. And so even though our city regulation game room, which is still on the books, by the way, even though it bans all game rooms and defines game rooms as any game room that has even one machine in it, we have an affirmative defense built into our game room regulation that is still on the books. And if any operation is currently receiving more than 51% of their income from something other than game rooms, think of a convenience store that sells gasoline and sells soda pops as well. If they're receiving more than 51%, they have an affirmative defense to prosecution. And that has never before been an issue expressed by council that as something that we need to address. And so now there are 3 or 4 operations that have seen those two definitional issues and have constructed this loophole where they are operating 5 or fewer machines, and they are generating 51% of their income from something other than the game machines themselves. And as a consequence, they're not regulated by either of the regulations. If that's something council would like to address by tightening up our existing regulation and then enforcing the regulation that is still on the books, we can certainly address that. But I would need some sort of policy guidance from council about what you would like to do.
Do you know of any intentions the county might have?
I do not know of any intent to change their current regulation. I believe it was very deliberate on their part to choose the state law definition of what is a game room because of the way other provisions like the enforceability provisions were written into state law. I believe that their attorney advised them that it was better for them to stick to the state law definition of what is a game room.
Okay. So it's not an oversight, it's just a
Agreed. It is not an oversight on the part of the county.
situation.
It's an intentional decision.
So, I guess for us, the primary reason I wanted Mr. Gooch to address it was to explain why, because people are referring to it, asking me, why are their game rooms still in operation? So they're technically not game rooms. So I would open it up to other council members for your opinion. From my perspective, I'm not too concerned about it, but I'm not gonna speak for any of you.
I have a question. I don't want to put our chief on the stand or on the spot, but if he has any feelings or thoughts, I'd like to hear them as part of this conversation. If not, we can hear it another time. Thank you.
If the prizes are still toilet paper, I'm sure that they're busy.
Can you imagine what the business would be now?
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. Yeah, if they were actually handing out toilet paper, it would be popular. As it stands currently, we are aware of the 3 or 4 boutiques that are offering services that are allegedly 51% of their business, but also have some game room machines in it. At this state in time, the police department have not received a number of complaints concerning operations of the game rooms. However, we're closely monitoring that, and any enforcement, activity would be based upon complaints. And just to reassure you, if we were to receive complaints, we would still investigate those if they're still in violation of the law concerning payouts of cash, and that didn't go away. So we would still be able to follow up and conduct appropriate enforcement action should it come up.
So once again, you still have the same authority to go into those establishments like you had under our game room ordinance, correct?
Yes, I do. And yes, we do as an organization. Department.
Thank you.
Mr. Gooch, how are the sales versus, the boutique sales versus gaming monies monitored?
They're not monitored.
So there's a
way that-
51% threshold, but we have no way of monitoring it.
The way the law is written as an affirmative defense, the reason I use that phrase is if the police department were to issue a citation to one of those business owners, it would be that business owner's responsibility to come into court during the criminal trial and assert that as an affirmative defense and prove it as an affirmative defense. We don't monitor it because it's their responsibility to prove it during the criminal process.
That goes contrary to proving one's.
That's correct.
I don't think
Correct.
in America you ever go into and have to prove your innocence. It's the duty of the state to prove your guilt.
I'm glad you pointed that out. That's an interesting characterization of what I just said, and I didn't realize that somebody might take it that way until you said that. In a court of law, especially criminal law, you're right. The prosecutor has a duty of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So if the prosecutor has the records to demonstrate that there are game machines operating there and is able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there is game room activity going on, then the defendant is allowed to assert his own or her own defense. Some of those defenses might be excuses like, self-defense, or they might be, in this case, an affirmative defense that is set out in law. And once the prosecutor has proved guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, then the defendant has an opportunity to prove their affirmative defense. And if they can prove their affirmative defense, then even though the prosecutor has demonstrated guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury could still find that person to be not guilty. I hope that's a more detailed explanation.
Again, from my perspective, I would say monitor the situation and deal with it if it becomes more of an issue. We're only talking about 15 machines so far,
Yes, sir, that's my understanding.
so I don't know how the rest of you feel about it, so.
Because of the element of potential problems that have arisen from previous game rooms, we used to have open at least one window, or I believe a window or something looking in to ensure safety. That goes away with the current ordinance or how things run with 5 machines, I would guess. Because it appears that these boutiques have them behind curtains, so to speak, away from the storefront, hidden in the back.
Yeah, I don't believe that the county ordinance specifies that specific requirement.
That's correct. And also, actually, I'm not sure about the county ordinance with regards to that. However, because these
Or game
don't
rooms.
rise to the level of the county ordinance, it wouldn't apply. We have the ability to go in and start enforcing our own regulations because they are still on the books with regards to those boutiques. That would include potentially requiring them to apply for a city permit for those boutiques because they are not licensed by the county regulation. And I think it might be advisable for City Secretary Hilbrick and the police chief and perhaps myself to sit down and look at what that would mean to restart up the city's process for permitting in order to enforce some of those regulations.
I have a
But
question.
again, if they're not a game room, how
I
does
know,
our?
how are,
Yeah.
not all
ordinance
boutiques
apply?
are game rooms or have machines. So you're imposing on a boutique that's a boutique, something that you mean to impose on supposedly a game room that's not a game room by definition.
I hear what you're saying, and I think that's a very valid point, that we are into a gray area here where we don't have clear guidance within the ordinance. And perhaps a better answer then would be, if council is interested in seeing us regulate this more tightly, then perhaps we should explore amending our ordinance in a way to capture this. Remember, we discussed back in December when all of this was going on, that once the county's regulation was adopted, we would come back and consider waiving our ordinance. We have not done that because we wanted to see how this all played out. This is a great opportunity for us to go back in and make changes to our ordinance if that's the direction council would like to see.
I wouldn't want to go that way. Because I say, you're gonna be going into the gray area of your other boutiques that are true boutiques. And what are you gonna do? Enforce them to come in here and get a permit just because 3 other people have got boutiques? I don't think that's fair to them, so I would go against it.
I agree with the mayor and Josie. This is trivial. We need to drop it and move on.
Yeah, until we have a complaint.
Right, and until it becomes a problem, let's not make it a problem.
Yeah.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We will now move into an interesting area of citizens' communication, because I understand we will have two options tonight.
Yes, sir.
Those citizens who are here with us tonight can come to the dais, the podium.
Yes, sir. As a matter of meeting management, you may want to just have all of the people in the room who are interested in addressing council go first, and then we
Right.
can move on to anyone who might be interested online.
All right, well, let's do that. Anyone, we don't have it, do we have anything with public hearings? No, so we don't have public hearings tonight. So anyone with anything to address council with, please step forward.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I'm Michael Vonra. I live in the East North Mobile Home Park, and I wanted to talk about the coronavirus. I have a neighbor that's a dumpster diver, and he don't use sanitary procedures or gloves, and he just goes through all the dumpsters and takes trash out and puts them in his yard. And I understand some are resale values like aluminum and stuff, but he just got a whole bunch of insulation that's rotted out and wet and has no value. And he's been doing this about 15 years. This isn't something that just came up. And, I don't want to publicly call him a hoarder, And I know he sells some of that scrap metal for money, but a lot of it is just junk. And I wish someone could visit him and talk to him. I've tried to talk to him and it don't work. But it would be nice if he could clean up and maybe be a little more sanitary. Thanks, and have a good night.
Thank you for your comments. Is there any other citizen communication?
Good evening, Council. I'm Trish Hastings. I represent Christ Kitchen here in Victoria, where we feed the hungry and the homeless. One hot meal a day, 6 days a week, 200 to 300 people a day, 5,000 to 6,000 people a month. And I'm here about COVID-19. This has changed the way we are operating. And I wanted to let you know that today we fed almost 300 people curbside, very orderly, without any conflict. And I also wanted to let you know that we plan to do that as long as it is safe for our community. I wanted to encourage council to work on a plan for those, should it be necessary, any of our homeless that have a positive COVID-19 test, to shelter in place. I don't have an answer whether we could possibly provide room vouchers for them. And I wondered if you had thought about what we would do with those people who have nowhere to shelter in place. I also wanted to encourage council, again, to possibly provide hand washing stations throughout the areas of our city where many of the homeless congregate, particularly Queen City Park, Will Rogers Park, the downtown area, and even north. I applaud the city for opening conversation with the assistant city managers to our nonprofits, because it's great to be heard. But I wanted to encourage you about hand washing stations as well. We also have no hand sanitizer. I don't know if you can help in any way there, but I will tell you that today, the chronically homeless that eat at our facility are terrified. They don't watch TV. They don't have access to news. And all they know about COVID-19 is what they're hearing on the streets. And we had several in tears at our facility today requesting latex gloves so they could eat their meal with gloves on because their hands are dirty. I would encourage you to consider the hand washing stations and a place for our people to shelter in place if necessary. And I'm open to any ideas or conversation. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to make one comment. We meet every morning about this subject, and what you brought up today will be brought up in the morning. And
Thank you so
very
much.
Thank you.
It is so nice to have your ear. We appreciate it.
Any other items from the public?
I really debated when I was up here a while ago if I should address this as well, because the world that I live in is so different than the world the people that I serve live in. And so our phone today has just been, I'm Jenny Stafford with Midcoast Family Services, but our phone is just ringing off the hook with people who are terrified. Some of them don't have the financial stability to hoard toilet paper. They don't have the ability to go to HEB and clear a shelf of things that they might need for the next 2 or 3 weeks. They're worried about making rent because they're worried about not having a job, not being able to have an income. Those are very real concerns, and I get it. But we're also hearing from people, like Trish mentioned earlier, that don't have a place to self-quarantine. I've been looking for guidance from our state and our federal sources, and one of the things that said that we should encourage them to sleep singly in tents, to move tents 6 yards apart so that they're not in close proximity, and to encourage them to use public facilities rather than going into convenience stores or whatever. Well, all of those are not good options. In my opinion, that's not acceptable. The best option is to provide hotel vouchers. And I don't know if you've been keeping up with what's happening in San Francisco and California, where they have a much bigger homeless problem than we do, but they've actually commandeered whole hotel chains and use that for homeless services. And I can tell you that as far as Midcoast is concerned, we cannot afford to do hotel stays. We can do it for a night or two, but not knowing what the long end of this is. So what I'd like to encourage you to do is to think about legally how we can do that. I have a feeling the city can't afford it either. Is this going to go on for 15 days or 3 months or through the summertime? We don't know. But there's got to be some drastic steps, because otherwise they're going to infect each other, they're going to infect us. It's going to be a domino effect and some consequences that we're not prepared to deal with. So I just wanted to tell you the best practice at this point is hotel vouchers and hotel stays, isolating. I can tell you at the Women's Crisis Center, we're doing everything we can to stay open. It is our commitment to our clients, especially those in imminent danger, that there will always be somebody there to take them in, to answer the hotline. But we can do that because we can isolate them in bedrooms, and we can isolate them in different parts of our shelter. People on the streets just don't have that ability. So let's use every tool at our disposal. I don't know what Texas says about commandeering hotel rooms, but I bet you that we got some smart people that can figure that out. Thank you for my second opportunity to speak.
Again, just a quick statement. In the meetings that we have every day, we have our state representative who sits in on some of our meetings. And I am in contact, not daily, but often, with our senator, who is the chair of the Senate Health and Human Services Committee. So this type of information, if it can be brought, whether we have the resources or not, which I doubt we do, I have no qualms in moving up the food chain, so to speak, and see if anything can be acquired. So I just want everybody to know that's the breadth of the effort that we're trying to make.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other comments?
Hello, Mayor, Counselor. A little nervous, sorry. My name is Eric Johnson. Call me Goose. I'm a body piercer here in town. I just want to speak out that a lot of the service industries, people are very, very nervous about this COVID-19. It has already impacted a lot of our sales, and we're hearing stuff about coming from California, closing down bars and restaurants, so there is concern. Just want people to be calm, and before making any big decisions about what we should be or shouldn't be doing as far as business-wise, please think about the people that are trying to help out and keep keep their business going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Goose.
Any other citizens' comments? If those who are present here, I'm going to say we're done. And now, do we have anybody from the public?
Mayor, I just checked with our IT staff. There is no one of it online who is seeking public comment.
Okay, then we will move on to the next item, which I believe is our emergency addendum.
Yes,
Is
sir.
that correct? Yes.
Yes, sir. Just as with everything else in this disaster situation, the agenda is fluid tonight, and we took advantage of the emergency posting provisions to add this to the agenda more than 1 hour before the meeting in order to talk about the disaster declaration. And before I do, I have a brief report on the ability to do the teleconference meeting as we have been discussing so far tonight. And I apologize that my laptop battery has had a very long, busy work day, and it's telling me it may die very shortly. So I may be cutting these comments short. In response, though, to this COVID-19 situation, the Texas governor issued an order yesterday suspending several sections of the Open Meetings Act. The purpose of that suspension is to reduce the need for people to congregate in physical locations by allowing telephonic or video conference meetings. And as a result of the suspension, City Council may, for future meetings during this declared disaster, hold its future meetings by telephone or video conference. That will relieve the necessity for City Council members to be gathered together here at this dais. And I believe it's the city manager's intention to play things by ear at this point and see business as usual as long as possible. But obviously, this is a fluid situation, and I wanted to make sure that the general public was aware that that's an option going forward. It is the reason why we're doing video conferencing tonight, because that gives us an opportunity to give a test run of those technologies, as well as allowing for a video conference presentation later this evening. In the event that we should choose to have a video conference meeting in the future, there are several provisions of the Open Meetings Act that will still be in place. The public will still receive notice of all meetings electronically posted on the city's website. There will be an opportunity for them to participate in the meeting, as there is tonight with video conferencing. Every meeting of City Council must be conducted by a quorum of the City Council. Still, this is not going to be meetings held by 1 or 2 people. There will still have to be quorum requirements met. However, the quorum will not need to be present in a single location. Okay, so if council members need to call in to a central teleconference location, the public will also be able to dial into that, and the public will be able to hear all comments of all members of the body, as well as anyone who participating in public communication. But I wanted to make sure everyone was aware that that is an option that is on the table, that is being considered, and the IT staff is working carefully with the legal staff to make sure that we are both technically and legally able to do what needs to be done. All right? Are there any questions about that?
Thomas, if I may, I just want to shout out to IT and communications team for literally putting that together in less than 24 hours. This literally was announced last night, and they really have stepped up to the plate for this, so I just wanted to say thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I will add to that, Mayor, you've seen it firsthand. There are some long work days going on with a lot of cooperation between individual departments and between individual governmental agencies, the city, the county, the school districts. It's an honor to work for the city during events like this, and we're all doing as much as we can.
Thank you.
The next item on the emergency addendum to the agenda is a continuance of the declaration of local disaster that the mayor issued yesterday. As you know, the state of local disaster that was issued can only last for 7 days unless it is continued by this governing body with a formal vote. And so we have a resolution for you to consider that would extend the period of that local state of disaster indefinitely until it is lifted either by the mayor or by city council. I will say that there, as of yet, are no executive orders that have come out as a result of that declaration of disaster. The mayor may want to address this further, but as of today, the disaster declaration exists in order to allow us to be more prepared and ready to take action when necessary. So if you approve this resolution tonight, what you are saying is that the declaration that has already been put in place can extend for more than the 7 days.
I so move.
Second.
Been a motion and a second to approve the continuation of the disaster resolution. Any discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Aye, opposed, same sign. Thank you. Thank you very much.
And my computer lasted exactly that long.
Okay.
So that takes us to the consent agenda tonight. Mayor and council members, several items that'll be approved by a single resolution, and I'll have to read from the screen, so there's further cooperation between James and I. The first item on the consent agenda is the adoption of the minutes of the March 3rd, 2020 council meeting. The second is the second and third reading to amend the fiscal year 2019-2020 budget to provide funding for the Airline Road Waterline and Reconstruction Project. The third is an agreement with Grant Works Incorporated for grant administration services for CDBG DR Hurricane Harvey buyout grant number 200666007C041 in the amount of $292,000. And fourth is an agreement with Grant Works Incorporated for grant administration services for the CDBG DR Hurricane Harvey infrastructure grant number 20-065055 C165 in the amount of $302,836.
And I would like to add that John Kaminsky with Grant Works is here tonight in case you decide to pull the item and have any specific questions for Grant Works.
I move that we adopt the consent agenda as read.
Second.
Been moved and seconded to adopt the consent agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign.
Thank you, Mayor. That moves us to item E1, which is to renew fleet management and maintenance agreements with First Vehicle Services Incorporated for $1,353,468.
Do we have a presentation?
Are we going to do the?
Yes, we do.
First, okay.
I always, it's a matter of practice, I would always prefer our presentations before motions.
I just didn't
Okay.
know if he was there just to answer questions in case
Well,
we had them.
I always give that option because honestly, I think it gives us more information up front even before a motion's made, so.
And we're trying to, big picture, get away from just being available for questions and providing more information, more context, not only for you, but also for our viewers at home. And he's up there to look handsome.
So,
Thank you.
if you could enlighten us, please do so.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me here tonight. Go over a little presentation about the fleet management maintenance agreement that we have in place. Start off with a little history. The agreement is between the City of Victoria and First Vehicle Services Incorporated. It's been in effect since 2013. The fleet size at the inception of this agreement was 262 units, which I'll explain why that's in there in a minute. This contract was intended to be a cost-controlling mechanism for fleet maintenance and repair, as the City of Victoria previously ran its own maintenance facility. We staffed that facility. We had parts, personnel, and management. And this contract, I think, it was incepted before my time with the city. So my understanding is that it allowed us to take advantage of First Vehicle Services' national parts pricing. They get a great deal on parts as they are a global company, part of a global firm. So they're also able to advise us on maintenance trends that are happening across the country with different vehicles and equipment. So they have some knowledge that's valuable to us as well. So this agreement, the details of it, pretty straightforward. It's going to have a slightly increased cost. The cost is based on the Consumer Price Index. The Consumer Price Index used at this time is for vehicle maintenance and repair, published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics for all urban consumers across the country. The contract previously stated that the CPI to be used was for the Houston-Galveston region. However, that Houston-Galveston region statistic no longer dives down as deep as motor vehicle maintenance and repair. So in the absence of that, this price increase comes from the national CPI. The renewal period for this agreement is 12 months, beginning April 1st. And our current fleet size is 290 units. And I put that in there, and I put the fleet size at inception in there to explain that through the 8 years that this contract, 7, 8 years, we're fixing to go into the 8th year of this contract, the maintenance contractor has had the option to reevaluate the size of our fleet and increase our price due to an increased amount of units, which they have never done. They've managed to operate within the contract rate that they get from us each year. So other than the expected increase from the CPI, we haven't ever gotten a price increase based on the size of our fleet. The contractor does have a few performance issues, which we've been tracking. They provide us each month with a statement of key performance indicators that comes with their invoice. There are 8 performance indicators on that statement, which 6 of them they meet every month. The 2 that are listed here, the emergency fleet preventative maintenance, they have failed to meet that 10 out of the last 12 months. They track technician productivity, and they've failed to meet that standard 11 of the last 12 months. So even by their own admission, they have a few issues that they're striving to work through. And we also, earlier, I think it was late last year, we did the leadership team survey of the city. In that survey, the fleet services and fleet maintenance was a part of what we wanted to discover how our leadership team felt about that. And the survey showed a general dissatisfaction with fleet maintenance, mainly in the PM area, where as they may drop their vehicle off, it's not like dropping it off at Firestone where you wait 30 minutes and you get your car back. It may take a couple of days to get your car back for an oil change. So this is not to go without saying that the contractor has come a long way since I came to the city. They've been very willing to work with me. They have new local and regional leadership. They've been very good. They just continue to miss on a couple of points. So as you're aware also, we have entered a pilot program with Enterprise Fleet Maintenance. I bring this up because you may wonder why we're renewing this contract while we are also entering this agreement with Enterprise. The program, we still need this maintenance program because the majority of our fleet, the vast majority of our fleet is still needing to be maintained by someone. The Enterprise program is a pilot program. We currently have 10 vehicles on the road in that program. We're tracking performance indicators, although the vehicles were delivered late January, so we have very little information at this time. But I can tell you that the initial performance of Enterprise has been very good, and that their lead times for getting vehicles to us is much shorter than what we've had from Ford directly in the past. So the initial take on that program is that it's good, but we're still evaluating the feasibility of it for our city. But that being said, they do have some excellent things going for them. There are 20 preferred service providers in Victoria for Enterprise, which would mean that if we were able to put the rest of our fleet on this program, then there would be many locations for people to take their vehicle to get an oil change or get repaired. This would greatly decrease the downtime of our utility fleets. This program is only available, also just a note, for single rear axle non-emergency vehicles, which is what we would refer to as a white fleet. It'd be your utility pickup trucks and code enforcement cars and things like that. There will be some alternatives we're looking at in the future to this contract, considering the performance indicators. One of the alternatives is a complete new solicitation for a maintenance provider, and that would be if in the case that Enterprise is not a fit for our city. We would take a look at that. Third would be a simple renewal of our current contract going forward, maybe with some amendments. And the fourth, which is something we're going to take a hard look at, is a hybrid approach, which would be we utilize Enterprise Fleet Management and their 20 preferred local vendors for our non-emergency single axle vehicles, while we make a new solicitation for maintenance of our emergency and heavy-duty fleets. In which case, we would add all of our white fleet onto the enterprise fleet management maintenance system. They would offer maintenance advice. They would allow us to take our vehicles to any of their preferred vendors in town, and we would get their preferred rates at those vendors. However, they do not currently offer services for emergency vehicles or heavy-duty multi-axle vehicles. So that would be something that we would have to continue to look at, and we are looking at for the future. So, in short conclusion, the renewal of our current maintenance agreement is necessary prior to March 31st so we can continue to operate under the capacity that we are. And take note that the future contract will be renegotiated or procured as necessary when we come up with our findings from the enterprise program. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
This contract that we have currently with fleet management, is that going to, because of the timing, is going to go as part of the budget for this next year, right? It's going to be part of that budget. So if we wanted to go with an alternate solicitation, it would be for the following year, for
Correct.
21?
Correct, it would be for 21.
Okay. And then you would look at both the fleet maintenance with enterprise for the white cars or the white fleet, and then look for solicit negotiations for another vendor to take over the heavy duty and the emergency.
Correct.
And also starting at 21?
Yes, starting 21 also.
What are the dynamics with this maintenance that's going on now? Is that done here locally?
It is done here locally.
And
They
does
actually,
the monies essentially stay here locally?
they are a national company, so I'm not sure that the money changes hands in Victoria, so I don't know actually if you're speaking to whether or not the taxes are local.
Well, when I look at the enterprise option where you have 20 vendors in Victoria, that seems like an agreement where money goes directly to these local small businesses, I would assume.
It does, and that's an attractive feature for us, being that we are the city. We want to support that kind of business. This contract that we currently have is not a local contract, it's a national contractor.
But the people who work for fleet management live in Victoria.
They do.
And they spend their money in Victoria.
They do, yes, sir.
I don't think they spend the whole $1 million here, Ricky. But, well, I move that we go ahead and accept the maintenance agreement that we have right now and to go with option 4 for the future, you know, so that we start looking at those contracts.
I would recommend that the motions strictly
Yes.
stay formally to
Okay, just
accept
for
this
it.
item. We don't want to lock ourselves in the box for
Okay,
option 4
well,
for the
just to
future.
renew the fleet management contract.
Second it.
But noted that, we'll keep an eye out to consider that.
Guidance.
Guidance, that's right, yeah, guidance.
All right, there's
That
a
word's been
motion.
thrown out a lot, right?
Yeah. I'm on different tracks here. There's a motion and a second for item,
For item E1.
E1.
okay. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of item E1 signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
Item E2 is to abandon the 600 block of East Commercial Street for use by the city fire department.
Good evening, Mayor, members of council. Just thought this would be a great time to update you on our Station 1 hardening project, and this will be very brief. As we presented during the budget season last year, we talked about a very extensive project for Fire Station 1, which involved hardening the structure, making it wind-ready, doing a total remodel of the inside of the station, and lastly, a building of a warehouse. As we talked about in that budget presentation, that complete project was going to be funded through our ambulance supplemental payment program, and we continue to do that. But our funding came back a little different than we were expecting due to controls outside of our, due to things outside of our control. So we've scaled this project back, or we have extended the timeline on the project, and we will be coming back to council in this next budget season and presenting those other projects. Those other two projects are still moving forward with the hardening project. And we still continue to plan to pay for this complete project with funds from our ambulance supplemental payment program, which usually average around $250,000 to $300,000 a year. But we're here to talk about Commercial Street. Just last week, the Sales Tax Development Corporation transferred the land to the city of Victoria that you see there, that little lot with the gray block on it, which is where our warehouse will go. And tonight, we are requesting that the council approve the abandonment of that section of Commercial Street. And we currently use that as our private drive. It's within our fence that has a secured gate in front of it. So this is officially abandoning that street and giving that ownership to the city of Victoria. We spoke to the railroad, and they were totally okay with that. They didn't have any problem with us doing that. I'll be happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Need a motion?
Should I entertain
Yeah.
a motion?
Move to approve E2.
Second.
It's been a motion and a second to approve item E2. Any further discussion?
I was just going to say for clarification, I mean, basically, we're just abandoning the street usage part of this property because it looks like the city to the city. And, you know, so I'm trying to put a reason with it. And that's basically what we're doing. We're saying this is no longer a street.
It will no longer be a public street after
Public
the vote,
street.
and we're using almost as a private drive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of item E2, signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign.
That takes us to city manager reports.
So under city manager's report, we're gonna go a little bit out of order tonight. Listed number 3 on your agenda is a presentation by Verdunity, titled Sustaining Our Cities Through Sound Fiscal Stewardship. Kevin Shepard is the man in charge of this organization, and he's gonna be video conferencing in for his presentation from Dallas. As you can imagine, travel right now is a little bit limited. But before he comes on, I wanna provide a little bit of context. Since my administration came on board less than a year ago, we've been trying to look at ways that we could operate smarter. We've been looking at different ways that we could be more efficient. We've been looking at ways that we can be looking at the future, planning better how we spend our money, planning better how our community grows. We want to make sure that we take a 21st century approach to our operation. And so part of that exercise has included, for instance, some things that we're already doing. The street assessment. The street assessment is taking a very data-driven, modern approach to analyzing our streets, sort of eliminating a lot of the human mistakes that can happen with assessing the streets. We're obviously looking at enhancing our financial planning. You all know that there's some debt capacity that is coming up in the next several years, which we plan on getting into at our budget work session later this month, if we have it. But it's also a big part of economic development and community development. You know, we've been talking a lot over the last 6 months about downtown redevelopment. We've been talking a lot about community development. And what we need to start hopefully educating ourselves a little more on is that we play a big role in that. We play a big role in how our community grows. That message was echoed by Ed McMahon, who was here last week. He gave a presentation at a chamber luncheon. He gave a presentation at the Welder Center downtown, and he spoke a lot about, you know, communities have two choices. You know, you either plan or you let others kind of dictate your future. And so we obviously want to take the approach of planning for our own future. And Kevin with Verdunity, his company provides a new, modern, fresh way to look at how communities grow and the impact that our codes, land use regulations, et cetera, have not only on economic development, but our financial impact. So we want to be mindful of that. I know some of you have heard him speak either at the TML conference in San Antonio or at the Economic Development Conference in Bastrop. But this is an opportunity for the council members that haven't heard him speak to hear what services they offer. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Kevin.
Okay, can you guys hear me okay there?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen. and I will get going here. Okay, you guys see that on your end?
We see you.
Is there something we need to click over, James?
I just shared. Oop. Hold on. There we go. Try one more time. There it goes.
Certain.
Okay. If I can get this up. Okay, how's that?
There you go.
Much better. That's good.
Okay, well, I apologize for not being able to be down there in person. I wish I could have been, but yeah, with the virus going on, I just felt like it was the right thing to do to cancel the trip, and asked if we could do this by video, and you guys were cooperative, and it sounds like you're experimenting on a number of angles on this. So I'm gonna jump right in. I've got probably take me about 15 minutes to get through this, and then we'll take some questions at the end. So I always like to start with this. I've, for about 15 years now in my work nationally, and here in Texas, I've been asking mayors and city managers this question of, when it comes to growth and development in your community, what's the biggest challenge or frustration that you're dealing with? And almost unanimously, 90% or more will say some version of this, that it's, how do we address the growing wants and needs of our community with limited resources? And when you dig a little bit further, they'll say infrastructure. How do we maintain and keep up with the infrastructure that we have? And as I was traveling around the country, this was back in the late 2000s, so right around the recession time, I was traveling around the country and seeing different communities, all over, urban, rural, big city, small city, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest. And, no matter where I went, they all had this same question of not being able to fund their basic infrastructure. So they were funding police and fire and pensions at the time, and now we know pensions have become a little more of an issue too. But the infrastructure, and more specifically streets, was something that every community was really struggling with. And then at the same time, I would come back to Dallas, where I'm based, and see this race to be the best place to live, work, play, or to say it another way, all of our communities around the whole country, and especially here in Texas, are we're all competing to recruit and retain residents and businesses. And what I started to see, and what we really explored over the last 8 years with our organization now, is post World War II, really the last 40 years or so, our cities have aggressively pursued the growth and the higher quality of life, amenities, in the short term, without fully considering the long-term impacts. And you hear a little bit about environmental impacts and some of that, but there's not enough conversation about the long-term fiscal impacts of our development. And the question I've started to ask cities is, what about maintenance after growth? These are pictures from real places that I've been, that I've worked in, that at one point or time were, a best place to live, work, play. They were an affluent place that had growth, that had jobs, had people moving in. And then as they got older, got further along in their growth, they weren't able to keep up and maintain everything. And so the businesses and the residents started to move out, and it starts a cycle of decline. We don't necessarily have that in Texas yet. I think we're starting to see it in some places. But where it's really starting to show up again for Texas now is this idea of street maintenance. This is a slide from Richardson, Texas. They're a first-ring suburb just north of Dallas, and 40% of their streets are over 50 years old. 70% of their streets are over 40 years old. And for any of you that dabble on the engineering side or the infrastructure side, the the average age of a street is 40 to 50 years. So we're starting to see more and more of our communities in Texas that are now at this place where a large majority of their streets were built 30 or 40 or 50 years ago and are now due to be replaced, and they don't have the money to fix all of them. So when you start to dig into this, you see that there's a relationship between the pattern and the model that we've developed under, and just the revenues and costs associated with that. And over and over and over, what I saw nationally and what we're seeing here in Texas now with more of the cities we work with is we're just simply not generating enough tax base to pay for the true costs that are needed to serve and maintain our neighborhoods and our communities at the current expectation levels. It works for a little while. It works especially when you're in growth mode. But as you get older, like I said, as you get older and your growth and that the revenue from the new growth slows down, it gets tougher to maintain all of that older infrastructure. This is an example from Brownsville, Texas, that we worked on just to kind of illustrate the point that I'm talking about here. This is a cul-de-sac street. You can make the case that the only people that really benefit from this street are the people that live on this street. And so the property tax revenue that's generated from these properties is about $6,000. You can see up there in the top left of the slide, it's about $6,000 per year. The cost of this replacement, the city was looking to replace this street. The cost was going to be a little over $200,000 to replace the street, and they're expected to get 40 years out of it. If 100% of that property tax revenue went to that street, it would take over 33 years, almost 34 years to pay off that project. So the project's going to last them 40 years, and it takes them 34 years to pay it off. But that's if 100% of that property tax revenue goes to streets. And as you guys know, there's no city out there that has that. It's usually 3%, 5%, maybe 10% goes into street replacement or street maintenance. So this chart kind of illustrates the growth or the challenge that we're up against. In that, every city starts out at the left there, where you've got a small population and a kind of an older part of town where your community starts. It's usually your old historic square or Main Street and a couple of the neighborhoods around that. And as you look at the original years of a city, it grows fairly slowly. And then most cities get to a point that it's their time to grow. And you see a lot of growth in a short amount of time, where the developers will come in and they'll build the homes, and you see all the new subdivisions, the new schools, the new businesses, the buildings, all of that stuff comes in together. Usually, in a lot of places, I don't know, I haven't studied Victoria enough specifically to know exactly how your growth pattern has been, but in a lot of places, it's usually a 20 or 30 year kind of period where a significant portion of your city's kind of footprint gets built. And that's the best place to live, work, playtime. That's where you see a lot of the suburban communities around North Texas, that Frisco, Plano, Rockwall out here on the east of Dallas, where I live. There's a lot of places that we're in the growth mode, and everything's kind of shiny and new and growing, and the amount of the older infrastructure that you have to take care of is pretty small compared to the amount of new stuff that is being built. But as you push to the right, as your city continues to age, as it continues to grow and get closer to build out, you see the population start to slow down. And when the population growth slows down, the revenue from the new growth also slows down. So the additional property tax revenue you get from growth, the additional sales tax revenue you get from growth, impact fees if you have them, all of those things start to slow down. And at the same time, the maintenance costs, the infrastructure costs for all of that development that was built in the growth phase, 20 or 30 or 40 years previous, all comes due, all starts to hit at the same time. And that's where you see, everybody's familiar with Detroit, Ferguson, Missouri, Shreveport, Louisiana, Memphis, Tennessee. I could go on and on with a bunch of them that they're there. They're at that point that they couldn't maintain everything. They couldn't take care of everything. And so they've seen a kind of a contraction of sorts with population starting to flatten out or even decline. What the message I'm trying to share with Texas communities is let's get out in front of that. We're blessed with a ton of growth, a ton of resource, philanthropic investment. We've got a lot of great things going for us, but when you look at our development pattern and compare it to some of these older places, we're really not doing things that differently. In fact, we're actually doing them bigger and faster, which could mean a bigger and faster crash for us on the back end. So what I'm going to talk going forward about is what can we do? What can we do about this? I added this slide here recently. I just 2 weeks ago, I presented at the TML Elected Officials Conference in Frisco. And I put up this slide because this is a real tension that I see right now in Texas, where on one hand, you've got our taxpayers that are saying, don't raise my taxes. I can't pay. We can't, we're either not willing or not able to pay anymore. And then on the same time, you talk to almost all of the city folks. And with SB2, the property tax cap, the annexation bill, and that stuff from the city side, it's just like I started this presentation with, we're so strapped, right? We know there's so many things we have to do, and and not enough resources to take care of that. So there's a tension of on the city side, we have a lot to do, and we need more resources, and then from the taxpayers, they're tapped out. And so what do we do about that? So we need a common language to talk about these common problems and ultimately get to solutions. And we think that fiscal sustainability can be that language. It's the closest thing I've seen. Cities are really complicated and complex organizations to deal with, and it's kind of oversimplifying things to say that there's that one metric that you can look at. But the majority, I would argue that the majority of things, I mean, if you look at the most important document in a city, it's really the budget. The annual budget process is where the priorities really come out of what's the most important things we need to do. And so when you think about fiscal sustainability and tying the decisions that you make as a community to the revenues and costs that they generate or add, you can start to look at this and equate things of land use, zoning, growth management, annexation, infrastructure investments, economic development. There's a lot of things that can be funneled through this lens. This slide that's up right now shows a couple of examples from Fort Worth. This is kind of the downtown core circle area around downtown Fort Worth, and it's just to illustrate the example of if you have some vacant property in an area, what you do with that development type, how you develop that can add population, and it also affects your revenues, which can either, if you hold your tax rate the same, can generate additional revenue, or if you want to lower your tax rate, it generates additional revenue and allows you to pull the tax rate down. What this slide illustrates is basically if you take the vacant land and you put single family on it, you could add around 10,000 population. And just by going from vacant land to single family, you get an additional revenue bump that could lower, for Fort Worth, they would be able to lower their tax rate from I think it was 0.83 at the time we did this, to 0.786. And then in the bottom right is the kind of the other end of the spectrum, where if you went with really, really intense, dense mixed use development, you could add almost double the population, which is important because sales tax and businesses follow population. The more people you put in an area, the more demand you generate for services and businesses. So you add more population, and then also the more dense development does a lot better in terms of property tax revenue, which I'm going to explore more in a second. And so when you get that more dense development, you get that additional revenue. That allows you to lower the tax rate even further, or to hold your tax rate where it is and have additional revenue to go back into your budget. So when we look at property tax revenue, and I'm going to kind of dig into this idea of property tax revenue per acre and net revenue per acre. I think what I've seen a lot of cities starting to do is we want to keep the property tax rate down. And so we look at how can we grow our economic development? How can we grow the sales tax base to take pressure off the property tax? And that's a good goal to have, but it's also it's kind of fragile in a way, and especially with what we're experiencing right now, I think we're seeing that or beginning to. So I think I like to advocate for or make the argument that what you build on your land should generate enough in property tax, at least for us in Texas, we're a property tax state. What you build on the land should generate enough in property tax revenue to pay for a significant portion of your general fund services, police, fire, but also streets. And not street maintenance, but street reconstruction. The actual, what it's going to cost to rebuild that road when it needs to be completely redone. So this slide, I'm going to go through a couple that illustrate property tax revenue per acre. These are a couple of slides from Chuck Marone at Strong Towns. If you're not familiar with Strong Towns, they're a nonprofit, strongtowns.org. Chuck and I have been friends since 2010, and they're a great group that's growing and impacting this movement of fiscally sustainable development. So on the left, you have this is two kind of similar areas, same street frontage, all the infrastructure is the same. On the left, you've got an old and blighted block that's just you'll see on the next slide what this looks with a bunch of narrow long lots that are kind of the old Main Street development pattern. And then on the right, you have a brand new fast food restaurant with the big parking lot. This is what those look like on the ground. You can see kind of the old block on the left, the fast food restaurant on the right. That old block generates over 1 million, it should be 1.14, over $1 million per acre. So if you take the assessed value of the property, divide it by the size of the property, you get a revenue per acre number. If you do that same thing for the fast food restaurant, that is 800,000 per acre. And then this is actually, these numbers are about 4 years old now. Chuck came through Dallas back last November, and I asked him how these were doing. And that old and blighted block is holding steady at right around 1.1 million per acre still. The fast food restaurant has dropped to around 600 per acre. And kind of to add to this, the one on the right got incentives to come to town. So you see kind of this old resilient pattern of the smaller buildings, more buildings in an area, more buildings in the area, less parking, and it generates more tax base for the city. When we take this concept, and I know I apologize, I'm going a little fast, but I want to get through this and leave some time for questions. When we take this revenue per acre and we flip this vertically and map it, this is what Dallas County looks like. And it's we've done this for a lot of different counties. We're not the only company that does this, but it's pretty clear from looking at this. You can see where downtown Dallas is. It's that big green chunk in the middle with the really high peaks. And then as you go outward from that, you see a lot of the first and second and even third ring suburbs around Dallas that on the surface are seen as affluent places. But when you compare their revenue per acre and their net revenue per acre of how these different development patterns are doing, they're significantly less than what you see in our core older downtowns and you see this over and over and over, Dallas, Fort Worth, cities all over the country. So what we started to explore with this is this getting back to the idea of infrastructure funding and this infrastructure funding gap that our cities have is I wanted to be able to explore what is the property tax revenue being generated by these development patterns and what is the street, what's the cost to serve them, both in terms of just your general fund, and then if you were to save the money that it takes to do a full street full street reconstruction, if you had that money and set that aside, what would that do, and how would different development patterns perform? This slide kind of sums up what we do. The maps and the numbers that you see are from Bastrop, Texas. This was one of the first ones that we did a couple of years ago. But the first step that we do is we'll look at your current budget, and we'll take, when you look at your budget, the way we do our budget is the money in equals the money going out. But when we take that and we map it down at the parcel level, we can start to see for individual parcels which ones are generating a surplus, meaning that they bring in more property tax revenue than they cost to serve, and which ones are actually costing the city money in terms of they bring in less money and they cost more to serve. Ag parcels is a great example. If you have an ag parcel out there, especially in an area that has road service to it, you're providing police and fire, you're on the hook to provide police and fire to it. It's costing you, it's adding to your services, but it's not generating much in revenue. Compare that to a pattern where you have a street and you have it fully developed and everything's built out. You're probably generating a surplus there, at least in some development patterns. But that current conditions in most cities that we look at don't include those infrastructure costs. They don't include the costs that we would need to maintain our streets and drainage, parks and other things. So the second level that we'll go into is say, what do you really need? If you had the money to replace all your streets and you were saving that money annually, or if you want to look at an additional kind of projected general fund of what you might need additional for police and fire, things like that. We do, and every city is a little different with what they want us to forecast there. But at a bare minimum, I always say, let's just look at streets. In Bastrop's case, to replace all the streets they had on the ground, they needed $144 million. It was roughly $7 million a year, and they were spending around $1 million a year on streets when we did this. And so when we'll go through that process, and then we'll drill that down to the parcels as well. So you can see kind of for the current conditions how parcels and different development patterns do. And then when you add what you really need to serve these, you can start to you can look at that as well. And then the third level that we've gotten into with some cities is looking at comprehensive plans and scenario developments and saying, if we did this, what might that do to close our gap? This was a quote that I really liked that we got from Linda Umble. She was the city manager of Bastrop, and she just recently resigned there, unfortunately. But this is what she said. She said, most city managers understand they have a resource gap, but when it's not quantified and shared publicly, it's easy to defer to next year. Once you put a number to it and see how large that number is, it creates an ethical obligation and urgency to address it immediately. That's what happened in Bastrop. Their whole council kind of rallied around this idea of, we're 144 million in the hole. What are we going to do about it? It led them into this whole kind of chain reaction of talking about an update to their zoning code and comp plan and CIP to basically build more fiscally sustainable development. And it was really cool to see how the residents kind of rallied behind it as well. So to show you just a couple of real quick case studies of what this looks like, where we've done this and how it can provide. This first one I'm going to show you is Brownsville, Texas. Noel Bernal is the city manager down there. When he got down there, he talked with the council there about fiscal sustainability and especially wanting to cultivate wealth from the bottom up in their community. And so he brought us in to kind of help just put a number to kind of what their gap was and try to look at a way that they could shift their development pattern to close their gap. This is what Brownsville's street costs look like. They had to replace everything just on the ground. They needed $1.3 billion. These were real high level numbers. I think if I put my engineer hat on and I get down in the weeds, I could probably say some of these streets were going to cost less than that, and some would cost more than that. But for a quick number, we felt pretty pretty good with it. But 1.3 billion is a big number, and if you divide that over 20 years, it came out to 65, almost 66 million a year. And the scary thing with Brownsville is over half of that, as this chart shows, over half of those streets are over 50 years old and need to be done like now. So in a case like Brownsville, an older community, they have a lot of streets that need to be redone right now, and they're already behind the curve and trying to catch up. This is what their maps look like. This is their current budget, so you see a lot of green. This is actually an ROI map, a return on investment. So this just shows for every $1 that the city spends to serve it, how much do they get back? So if you see a green parcel, it's making money. If you see a red parcel, it's losing money. And then the height of the bars and the shades show by how much. But for their current budget, you can see most of the city is doing pretty well. And then they have a lot of undeveloped area that's the red. And so it looks kind of how you would expect it to look. But when we add the streets in, you can see what happens. A lot of the parcels go red. A lot of the parcels kind of lose a significant amount of their green. And what we started to do is look and say, okay, the ones that stayed green, why did they stay positive? What are they doing that's allowing them to still take on these additional street costs and additional general fund costs and still stay net positive? The second one, and I'll tell you our answer to that here in a second. The second community I want to point out is Pflugerville, Texas. This is a fast-growing suburb outside of Austin, and they're the other end of the spectrum. They're younger, they're newer in the growth phase. They're right on the beginning, the early stage of the best place, live, work, play growth phase. This is what their street costs look like. It's the exact opposite of Brownsville, where most of their streets are further out. They're not looking at reconstruction until 2050 or beyond. So for Pflugerville, the conversation was, okay, here's the amount of money that we need. What can we do to start to save up that money or get in front of this so that when we need to rebuild those streets, we have it? This is what their map looks like. This is current conditions, current budget conditions, and you see the same kind of pattern. You see a lot of green and then red where their vacant land is. When we add in the street costs, same thing. You see how a lot of it goes red, and then some neighborhoods hold their value. What we do with this after we do the maps are always cool to look at, and a lot of people like to, and when we do these, we have this in GIS, so we can zoom in and out and spin it around and look at all kinds of different things there. But the real takeaways from this are when we do some of the analytic charts and tables that come out of it, where we can look at these development patterns, whether it's by land use code, zoning district, a neighborhood. Usually every city will kind of tell us, well, I want to see what this development looks like compared to that development. This is from Bastrop. And the one with the really high blue bar that you see there was their downtown. What they found when we did this was their historic downtown performed significantly better financially than anything else they had in the city. And this is what led them, when they redid their code, they basically said, look, if we want to close our gap and close it quickly, we want to look at our downtown and that development around there. And it's not just their 1 or 2 blocks of the main street, it's also the neighborhoods around that they looked at. But they said, if we really want to close our gap quickly, what can we do to build more development that looks like the downtown, and maybe try to balance out our portfolio, for lack of a better term. You're really looking at a development portfolio that gives you a mix of patterns for different neighborhood, lifestyles, affordability, all those kind of things. You want a mix that ultimately pencils out for you. Another chart that we look at is this one, and this shows the revenue per acre for different lot sizes. What you see here is on the left side is the blue bars are the going left to right are the smallest lot sizes to larger. So you have under 0.2 of an acre, and then you work your way to over an acre on the right. The blue bars are the average structural value, so that the average of the building on the property. But the green line is the revenue per acre for those different lot sizes. And what we see over and over and over, every single city that we've looked at, that we modeled, has this same trend, where the really small lots have the highest revenue per acre, and the largest lots have the lowest revenue per acre. So that's just been an interesting takeaway as well. This kind of comes into play when cities are talking about what should our minimum lot size be, what kind of density do we want, those kind of things. This was another one. This was a takeaway from Pflugerville. They wanted to see how some of the different development patterns, the commercial patterns, performed, not on the sales tax side. And we can get into sales tax if you want to, but I try to keep this focused on property tax initially. But what I'll just point out from this one, and what we see over and over and again, is in the top right, you see they're kind of a one block of their main street that's got some one and two story mixed use development in it. That development gets over 7,800 per acre for them, and also has a fairly low building improvement value. And then when you get to the big box stuff, the really large big box stuff, the building improvement value is really, really high. It costs a lot for a developer or a business to put that building in, but for the city, the tax revenue they're getting back is less than half of what that little Main Street block was getting. So for a smaller area and a less expensive building, the city is getting a much higher kind of bang for their buck in terms of property tax revenue per acre. This is primarily due to the amount of building on the land. The number one thing you can do to drive your property tax revenue per acre up is put more building on the land. If you take up that land with a big parking lot, with big detention, other kind of stormwater detention, other things like that, you'll lower that revenue per acre number. That stuff is needed and necessary, but I think we also have to have a kind of a fiscal element to the conversation. So these are kind of just the takeaways there, just to point these out for you. Most of the cities we look at are not fully accounting for the money they need to replace their streets, especially when we look at the second and third life cycles. Most of our development patterns, most of our parcels are not generating enough from a property tax revenue standpoint to cover the costs, which continues to put pressure on economic development to generate more and more from sales tax. In terms of what development patterns do best, the traditional grid neighborhoods, downtowns, walkable mixed use, those just continually, consistently do better than the suburban, more spread out suburban style development. And I always want to point out here, this isn't to say that one pattern is better than the other. I think we need all of them, but we need a little bit, if we want to get our finances back in order long term, we need a little more kind of fiscally sensitive or balanced development pattern. The highest returning parcels there, I mentioned the high ratio of building footprint to lot size, multi-story structures. Anytime you go think of a residential home, if you have the same lot size and you have a one-story home on it, it's worth something. If you have a second story same lot, it's usually worth more. Narrow lot frontage, smaller lots, narrower streets. I was actually listening in earlier as you guys were having the conversation about the speed limit. And I think I'm a big advocate for narrowing streets. If you want to slow your cars down, I've seen a lot of cities that have posted the 25 mile per hour signs, but the signs don't slow people down. Enforcement is what slows people down. Or if you really want to get, the cars to slow down without having to get the police out there to enforce it, you build narrower streets that force people to drive slower. But the other benefit of that is the neighborhoods with the narrow streets do a lot better fiscally as well. So all of this, what I always end with is, when we go into communities, it's not our job to say one development pattern is right or wrong. But what we do is do the data, do the mapping to show you where you are, and have a more transparent conversation with your residents and the community about what these costs look like and how you're going to pay for them. And it really comes down to these three options. You can keep your development patterns and service levels where they are. but you're going to have to charge more through higher taxes and fees to cover those costs. You see that in older, more mature cities. They have higher tax rates, they have more fees, stormwater utility, other things in place. The second one, this is where most of our cities are really, is you keep your pattern and tax rate the same, but we cut services to align with revenue. And I would say anytime you do a capital improvement program, you have a list of projects that's really, really long, and you're only able to fund a certain amount of them. That's just one example of what I'm talking about of we have to make choices. You guys as the council have to make choices every year on what you're going to fund and what you're going to defer to later. And then the third option is what could we do if we shifted our development pattern and our infrastructure design and looked at an affordable balance of services and taxes. So there's this other option out there in terms of, we talk about the tax rate, but just by changing your development pattern a little bit and some of your infrastructure design, you can really ratchet up that property tax revenue per acre and ROI, which gives you guys as a council an opportunity to ultimately hold your tax rate and generate some additional revenue, or you can generate that additional revenue and then it allows you to kind of hold your budget the same, but lower the tax rate. Last slide I've got, and then I can take some questions if you guys want. We're seeing a lot of different cities apply this in different ways. Everything from strategic planning and budgeting to looking at land use, annexation, growth management decisions. I mentioned zoning codes earlier. I know you guys don't have zoning there. We're doing a project right now for Pasadena, Texas, just south of Houston, that they don't have zoning either, and they're looking at how they can start to make more informed development decisions. Maybe not necessarily going all the way to zoning, but at least having a little more fiscal context to the decisions that they're making. Infrastructure CIP is something that can be informed by this. Economic development folks are really starting to latch onto this as well, just because of what I said earlier about the idea of the more people you put into an area, you can also generate additional sales tax space and commercial demand. And then we're just starting to scratch the surface of the community education programs too, of how do you start to have a conversation with your community about these services and infrastructure needs that are coming to your community and that you need to pay for, and you want to have a way to kind of unlock that dialogue that isn't so tense as just making it just about the property tax rate. So that's where I'll leave it. I'm gonna take my slides off and see. There we go. And just open it up, see if you guys have any questions for me.
This is Jesus, City Manager. Thanks for the presentation. The concepts that he's outlining, we already have some projects that take all of these principles into account. I mean, for instance, the Ben Wilson Corridor project, taking a 5-lane road, narrowing it down to 3, quote unquote road diet. I'm not sure if at the time when the decision was made, there was a financial analysis done to it, but the reality is that obviously, whenever it does need to be reconstructed, it's going to be significantly less expensive doing it when it's a 3-lane road than it being a 5-lane road. And that's the same concept of, narrowing streets, slowing people down. And so those are the kinds of decisions that we could probably, in general, as local governments, do a better job of, is taking the financial impact of our infrastructure-related decisions. And this is a good way to go about it. Kevin and I have been talking for, gosh, it seems like forever now, about, working together on this here, because I do think there is an opportunity for us right now to, I don't envision us being as bad as Brownsville, but I don't envision us being as Pflugerville either. And I know that during the most recent budget cycle, we shared with you an analysis that if we went back 10 years and we would have increased our property tax rate by 5%, that we'd have $5 million more in the budget. And so I want to make sure that moving forward, we make more informed decisions about the implications of those types of decisions and the impact that they actually have on our ability to deliver services and the impact that they have on issues that, of course, our residents care about the most, which is always streets. And so we are looking at formally engaging Kevin and the services that they have to offer. When council approved funds for master planning efforts and things of that sort that came from the TxDOT overpass funds, there was a specific line item in there for services such as the ones that Kevin and his company have to offer. But we wanted to make sure that you all had an opportunity to hear what it's about before we come forward with any other type of recommendation.
One question I have, from the data that you collect when you do these analyses, you can also tell from different segments of the city what property taxes is collected in those areas as compared to what's reinvested or spent in them, correct?
Correct.
Because I've often
sir.
wondered of that in just something in our CIP when we select projects and stuff, to make sure that we're providing equity to our taxpayers in where we spend this money.
Right.
It's just
Yeah,
one
that's,
element to consider.
Yeah, that's something that I really enjoyed looking at is from the capital improvement program standpoint of, you know, where you're investing your money, you know, where we always do them and we look at what's the condition and is there, you know, is of the street and then is there a water line that has to go with it? And that, you know, those are common strategies to CIP, but I like this idea of looking at and saying, okay, what investments could we make that would get the maximum return on investment in terms of preserving or maybe bumping up the property tax base in an area and just having a little more of an accounting aspect to those kind of investments.
One more thought in terms of the timing. I alluded to earlier the fact that we have some debt capacity coming up in the next few years, and it's been the intention of this administration to, over the next, you know, year and a half, to really provide all the information, whether it's through the street assessment, whether it's through an updated drainage master plan or some parks master plan, and all these other plans that I went through when we made the recommendation to allocate the funding, downtown master plan, because we are going to have an opportunity. We're going to have an opportunity to really make a dent in the future of this community once that debt capacity frees up. And it's important that we are as educated as possible, not only us, but educate the community as much as possible on where we get that greatest return of our investment. And so obviously it would be the recommendation of myself as city manager that we continue down this path, engaging folks like Kevin, and of course, continuing to ask for your support in the various master planning efforts that we envision undertaking over the next year to 2 years.
Well, this fits my profile because I've often talked and the deal that the more data we have, the more analysis we can do. In my mind, I think if we approach these expenditures in a balance of debt, taxes, and things, that we'll be able to make wiser decisions with the resources that we have. So
Any other questions? No? I think that's it, Kevin. So
Okay.
we appreciate
Well,
you taking the time.
It's weird not being able to see you guys, but I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you guys and hopefully I'll get to meet you guys soon. So,
Maybe there's nobody here.
Have a safe trip home.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
I'm
Have a
ready
safe
to
trip
see
home,
this
that's
works. I may choose to stay at home and just beam myself in here. So, but thank you very much.
Will it sign
All right.
the upper
Thanks,
corner?
Take care, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. We do have a couple of other topics on city manager's report, but based on the time, we'll quite frankly leave it up to you. If you want to continue listening to both reports or just pick one or just call it a day. There is an executive session on the agenda, but I will not need it. And so we would not need to meet in executive session, but I want to be respectful of your time.
Let's look at the subject of those reports.
So there are 2 annual reports. One would be from the fire department and one would be from municipal court.
Well,
They're here.
yeah, they're
Let's just do the
here.
meeting, please.
We may not
Okay.
all be here. I'd rather.
All right.
be-
I mean, that would
Who
be
wants to go
preference. I want to
first?
speak for
My
everybody.
preference.
Well, I would leave it to them because they've been working a long day. I'll tell you.
Correct, that's what they've
So
said.
if you wish to talk to us, chief, talk. If
Yes,
not,
sir.
We'll adjourn.
Well, good evening again, Mayor, members of council, and it is always my honor and pleasure to talk about all the great achievements the men and women of the Victoria Fire Department accomplished. So thank you for letting us do that. And when we built this, we built it in mind that we'll be brief. Before we get started, I wanted to thank Ms. Strevel and her communications team. We couldn't have done this report without them. They helped us put it together, so we greatly appreciate their help. And lastly, I want to thank not only the men and women of the Victoria Fire Department, but the command staff. They also helped build this report, but more importantly, thank them for the great work that they do every year. And it's, like I said, it's an honor to be the fire chief of the Victoria Fire Department. I love it when the mayor and the city manager talk data, because that's talking my language too. My goal is for the fire department to be a data-driven organization, and not just runs, but that's our starting point. Last year we made about a little over 11,000 calls for service. That's our most calls for service since we've been tracking it. It even eclipsed our 2017 numbers, which included our Hurricane Harvey response. Out of those 11,000 calls for service, you can see about 2,000 of those were in the county. And that's typical for us every year to year. And we see a typical 1% to 3% growth in our overall call volume. Break that down a little further, and you can see 71% is EMS, 29% fire and other type of emergencies. I just showed that so you can kind of see, how important our EMS, we're called the fire department, but as you can see, EMS is what we do. Drilling down a little deeper into the most common call types, what I wanted to bring your attention to is obviously you can see our medical emergencies. Motor vehicles is our second highest call type. But last year, we talked about Lift Assist, and we implemented our non-emergency services program kind of later in the year. And we're on a trend of a 20% growth every year and just going out and picking somebody off the floor and putting them back in bed. So we implemented a non-emergency services program, and we're able to cut that growth all the way down to 6%. We still had growth, but we're able to eliminate that or reduce that growth only by 6%. So that we see that as a success. And the big success of that, and I'll probably talk about it a little bit later, is that we were truly able to provide the services that the people needed. And really, it was about connecting people with the appropriate service, Meals on Wheels, different home health services, those type of things. So we saw it as a big success. The other call type we talked about that was a huge spike for us in 2018 was building fires. So what we saw this year was about a 10% reduction in building fires, so that was good. We think that's attributed to, I think you can just look around in our community and see the progression or the progress of rebuilding after Hurricane Harvey. So we attributed that to that. Either the structure was removed, demolished, or it was repaired to a state to where, there's not hazards and things of that nature. Going into our operations, that was kind of marked this year by some significant regional responses. This doesn't happen every year for us. We went into DeWitt County for a significant hazardous materials event. Our hazmat team, which we've been preparing for and training and all these stuff for all these years, deployed. That's them right there making entry and stopped a very hazardous material leak. And not all agencies can do that, and we play a regional role as the regional hazmat response team. The other incident was a very, very large wildfire in Refugio County. As the picture shows, that's the first large aircraft aerial drop of water that has happened in this region since anyone can remember, if ever. So we went over there and helped command and organize that incident. So what that really meant to us was we re-engaged our regional collaboration and really got a good foothold, a good foundation of regional collaboration. And how that benefits us is when we go for grants and things of that nature, they look at us as a regional agency. And we're able to get, just this year in 2019, we got $60,000 from Homeland Security to purchase a hazmat ID machine. So really that regional perspective and approach, and as the mayor alluded to earlier today, helping our regional partners out is a big benefit for us. In our EMS world, as we said, that's 70-something% of what we do. This past year, we implemented a whole blood program, which is basically a blood transfusion in the field. We started that in October. We are one of 15 to 20 agencies in the United States that are able to provide that level of service. We've administered 7 transfusions in the field, and I will say a majority of those cases, it was a matter of life or death. If they wouldn't have gotten that blood transfusion in the field, they would have died. So we're very proud of this program and is being very successful, and we're really proud of it. I'll just say that. Our other, and we received grant funds for it, is our Regional Bariatric Transport Unit. We received money from the Golden Crescent Region Advisory Council to establish a regional bariatric unit. That has become an ever-growing demand in our area, and it gives that patient comfort, dignity, and it also protects our individuals. So we've deployed that multiple times throughout the region, so it's worked out really well. Another big accomplishment is we were recognized by the EMS for Children. It's out of, I think, Baylor's medical education community. Once again, we're very few select agencies in the state of Texas have been recognized for pediatric readiness. And what this means is we have the appropriate equipment, the appropriate training, and the appropriate skills and ability to achieve this recognition. And lastly, on our EMS side, we implemented in 2017, 18, we started it. We received some grant funding from our 100 Club to develop a SWAT medic or a tactical medic team to deploy with the police department's SWAT unit. So we spent most of 19 training and preparing and getting those 2 teams together to really be as one, and it has been a big success in 2019. We've gone on 2 deployments with PD this year already, and in both instances, we needed to provide emergency care to the, I don't know what you call them, chief, customer of the police department. So we were able to be there quickly to provide that service. And, you know, we always want to take care of our citizens, even though they may be on the wrong side of the law at the moment. But anyway, it's been a big success, and I think the police officers really enjoy and appreciate this partnership. Our fire marshal's office, extremely busy, as you can see, over almost 2,000 inspections. So those inspectors and investigators are out there doing inspections and making sure our buildings are safe. Along with that, they've educated almost 10,000 kids and other individuals just on different fire safety programs. And we've collected almost a little over $20,000 in permit fees. But I'll tell you what they're really proud about, and we don't mention this enough, our biggest weapon against fire and damage and death is our fire code. Late in 2019, we had an arson case in one of our newer apartment complexes, which fell under the newer fire code, which required them to have sprinkler system. And we estimated it saved over $1.5 million in damage just in that one apartment complex because the sprinkler system was there. Not even considering the lives, because this was an early morning fire by an arsonist. Instead of looking like the picture you see, our picture looked like this. And we're able to maintain that property. Our training division, we've been talking a little bit about this on the city side. In 2019, we onboarded or brought on 29 new members. That's a quarter of our workforce, 29 new members, and our training division was extremely busy. One of the things that we did, because we've been seeing this as a problem over the past few years, is we started our local fire academy. In our second fire academy, we were able to hire 7 out of 9 of those recruits that were in that academy. So we feel like we've taken a big step in preventing or helping our recruitment and retention issue. And we are currently conducting our 3rd class, and they will graduate at the end of May, early June. And we're also extremely proud, and Councilman De La Garza is a big part of this, is our Stop the Bleed program. The Victoria Fire Department, along with other partners like Mr. De La Garza, have trained over 7,000 citizens in Stop the Bleed. I tell you what, we're probably one of the best communities of training and educating our community on that very important skill. And that's basically, you know, how to apply a tourniquet, how to apply pressure, and anybody can learn to do that. Vision 2020. As I mentioned, our non-emergency assist program was pretty successful. So we're looking at expanding that into different levels so we can provide the most appropriate level of care and resources. And MIH stands for Mobile Integrated Healthcare. In the future, you're going to see EMS change its name to MIH. It's no longer going to be emergency medical services. It's going to be mobile integrated healthcare. And what that means is it's not just emergency services, it's different levels of medical care in the community. Just as we talked about over the past couple years, cancer in the fire service, mental health is becoming just as big a crisis. And that's one of our focuses in 2020 is to really build up and develop a strong and aggressive mental health support program for our first responders. And we have already a great peer support group that's formed and functioning and ready to go to work. And lastly, one of the programs we'll announce probably during October, during Fire Safety Month, is our Fire Safe 2025. And what that is our goal is to have 90% of the single-family residences in Victoria with a working smoke detector. And for that to work, we need a lot of help from our agencies that make donations and stuff to our smoke detector program, because we do not do that with general fund money. We do that through donations. So that's our goal and vision for 2020 and what we're working on. With that said, we just want to take a second to thank council, because all that great work, we could not do it without your support, and I'll be happy to take any questions if you have any.
Chief, that MIH program is geared towards prevention. Do you look at repeat people that, or calls that you have? Is that somebody that goes out, and then is there grant funding opportunities like the mental health officers that may be of assistance to you in kind of warding or heading that program?
I would say if you could compare it to something, it'd be much like the mental health officers. It's just maybe a different perspective of care that's needed. And that's what we're looking at. Repeat customers, we call them repeat customers, repeat clients that call for our services or only really know is to dial 911 to get access to the healthcare system. Other means of funding that we've seen work and the models that we like are partnering with hospitals, because they also have an issue with readmission issues. If the patient readmits within so many days, they get penalized. So what we see in a lot of places, and kind of our vision is that we could step in there, prevent that readmission penalty, but yet also recoup some funding from the hospital, and it's a win-win for both organizations. So that's kind of how we're looking to fund those in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Could you explain, you didn't cover it, but how you affect insurance rates?
Oh,
for
ISO?
people?
Yes,
Yes.
actually. So, and we're prepared in June that we're going to have another ISO evaluation. Currently, our rating is 2, which 1 is the best, 2 is just right below that. Because we have that rating as a fire service or as a community, it keeps our insurance rates at a low cost. And we're going through the process of reevaluating our ISO rating in June. We had a consultant in that's working with us and kind of giving us guidance on things we may or may not need to do. And I say at this point, we're still really good. But we will have a plan coming back to council for our next ISO evaluation in 2030 of things we may need to do before 2030 to maintain that class 2. That's a great question.
But I think he was asking about the impact it has on us as taxpayers for our insurance, because that also helps our insurance rates.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So that classification helps residents, taxpayers, everybody with their insurance rates, especially commercial businesses. And Mr. Fowler's in the audience, or he was, and one of the first questions we're asked when commercial and big businesses looking to come to Victoria is, what is your ISO rating? And they're very happy when we tell them ISO 2.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank y'all. Thank you. And the mayor's doing a wonderful job in his first disaster. Thank you.
First, and he hopes
Hope
last.
it's my last.
His last, yes, we all.
Our next annual report is municipal court, and Tiffany will kick that off.
Okay. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So I'm here today to present the municipal court report. I would like to give a shout out to our judge. Vanessa Heinold has done such a great job transforming our court, and ultimately with our goal of ensuring justice is done and being able to promote that to our community. So a few things that we did in 2019 and continue to do as we move on to 2020 is mock trials is something our judge is very passionate about. She works with the youth, 8th grade students over at Nazareth Academy and Trinity. We continue to do mock trials every year in November for Municipal Court Week. We also did one with East High School last year as well, and she's currently working with students from the Bridge program. Well, not currently, but recently has been working with them. We also partner with the Environmental Department with the Keep Victoria Beautiful program and offer that as a community service opportunity for our defendants that come through the court. And we have partnered with them 5 times so far since April of last year. And so that just is another way for us to get involved with our other departments within the city. We do attend a monthly Traffic Safety Coalition meeting that's held by TxDOT. And with that, we are able to get out in the community and partner with other agencies. The Victoria Police Department put on National Night Out, which we participated in, and we use that as a way to promote traffic safety. Also, the Shattered Dreams program with the fire department, the judge has participated in that in the past as well, and that's something we hope to continue in the future. So some of the things in the 2019 that we were successful in is we provide access to justice by offering expanded services through our evening court sessions. We also recently had a Saturday court that allowed people to come in and try to resolve their past due cases, their warrants, to come in when they're unable to come in during our regular business hours. Increased awareness of our amnesty program that we have. That has been a big, with the Public Information Office, they've helped us to promote that through the newsletter and also through social media communication as well. We have standard operating procedures in place that do continuously change as legislative sessions come up. We have to change all those processes so we stay up to date on that. And then also developing our internal and external partnerships. So that means other departments such as animal control is one of our external partnerships that we have worked on developing, as well as code enforcement within the city and of course the police department as well. So this is some caseload data for you here for the last 3 fiscal years. We have seen an overall decline in cases filed, and we get cases from not just the police department, but animal control, code enforcement, and also occasionally the fire department. We get some tickets through as well. And so over the last 3 years, we have seen a decline in overall filings, warrants issued, and but one thing that has increased is the community service hours being performed by citizens, and that is to help discharge their fine and court costs. So we are seeing an increase in people with the inability to pay, and our judge, through the amnesty programs, is able to offer people community service to discharge those. So we're seeing an increase in that and an overall decrease in most of our other indicators. Some of our employee accomplishments, we do provide continuing education for all of our court staff. Every year, Judge Heinold attends a conference, and our prosecutor, as well as our bailiff, Detective Collins. We attend regularly the legislative update sessions, which occur, of course, every 2 years, and then monthly webinars are also available for our court staff. Some individual highlights here. We have myself, I was elected into the Court Clerks Association as a director at large. And also, I'm currently working on a certified court manager program through the Institute of Court Management, and attended a few other conferences as well. Maria, who is our assistant court administrator, achieved her level 2 clerk certification and attended 3 additional seminars to maintain that certification. And then one of our court clerks, Elizabeth Montes, did obtain her level 1 certification. And every annual conference, it's required to maintain that certification. And they are continuing to further that this next year as well. Some of our goals for this year, our judge does want to offer training for citizens. That would be at a low cost or free in our case, to be able to provide traffic safety initiatives to really promote safe driving and being safe on that. Expanding the mock trials to the younger age groups, so not just focusing on the 8th grade students and the high school students, but reaching out to the Bridge students are between the ages of around 5 and 12. And so that's one of our most recent initiatives. And then partner with other city departments to expand community service. So while we were working with environmental, we're looking to expand that to other departments as well. And then just increasing our connection within our community and being active and involved. Some other goals for improving efficiency, we are utilizing text message notifications to get our message out there as another way and a cost-effective way to communicate court initiatives, payment reminders, court date reminders. We're looking to implement an electronic warrant process from our department to the police department. That is in the works for this next budget year. And then offering virtual court sessions and services online. So we are implementing virtual court sessions sooner than later. We already have a Zoom account set up and we'll hope to launch it Monday. So that's coming. And then also being able to offer some of our other services like defensive driving setup, deferred, things that people can go online to do that without having to appear in person. Increasing our communication efforts of court initiatives, continuing to partner with the Public Information Office. Their team has been amazing in helping get our message out there. And then also explore the issuance of occupational driver's licenses. Our judges wanting to do that as well. Looking forward, one thing we are interested in is becoming a court of record. So we are currently a court of non-record. This is something that would require a review of the charter and ordinances related to municipal court, particularly the nuisance violations with code enforcement and health and safety concerns. And there would need to be an amendment of those in order for us to become a court of record. As far as what the requirements are, one of those, our judge would have to be an attorney, which that is currently a requirement. Our judge is an attorney. And we would have to develop a new seal. And we would have to have a court reporter or the ability to record proceedings, which we already have that ability. So that would be no additional cost to us. The only cost we may encounter is if we had to transcribe the court proceeding for an indigent person who is unable to pay. The benefits of that is it does give us more authority over code enforcement violations. It would increase our jurisdiction over particularly buildings and nuisance violations and give the code enforcement more power. Right now, they file a case and it's a fine. We can't do anything further than that. That would give us increased jurisdiction over that. It would be basically the same power as the county court at law for that matter. And then it would reduce the number of appeals. I don't see that as a huge benefit for us. We don't have a whole lot of appeals. We probably have less than 3 a year. But sometimes people can leapfrog municipal court if they are a commercial driver's license holder and go straight to the county, and that would limit the ability to do that. And then we would retain fines on any appeal that did occur if there was an error found. I know there may be more questions on the court of record. This is maybe the first time any of you have heard about what a court of record is or can do. I have had some discussions internally with Thomas and city management's office as well, and we do feel this would be a great benefit for us. And just some of our initiatives going forward, just focus on improving our access to justice. We're now looking to expand that virtually as we are needing to provide access to people that can't physically come in, and continuing our education for court staff, being effective and efficient in our case management, and then growth of expanded services. And with that, if anybody has questions for me.
Could you go back to the slide with the 3 years on it?
Sure.
Could you clarify case disposed? I notice it's 68 here, it's 81, it's 78.
Yes, so a case disposed is the number of cases in that particular year that were disposed. And that could either be through a dismissal from the prosecutor, it could be a payment of the fine, it could be a defensive driving completion, just a successful completion of a case where there's nothing left on it. Now, doesn't mean that there are other cases that were filed that maybe have a judgment on them, but they still could be pending because they're still owed. Or there was a warrant issued, they never appeared on it. So that is just, in that particular year, the percent of cases closed that were filed in that year.
Why is it so much different than the previous year?
So the fiscal year 19 it's more recent, and that one we're still closing cases out from that year. And the further back we go, then the more likely we are to close more cases. We did have a warrant cleanup program in 2018 where there were several cases that were disposed of, either warrants recalled or dismissals because of old cases that we had pending on the 10 plus years old, the prosecutor reviewed. And so that is why we had a larger number of warrants cleared as well as cases disposed, because it would show those particular cases being cleared at that time. We also implemented that's when we implemented the open court dockets as well, was in the beginning of that fiscal year.
And your night court and your Saturday court are very successful?
Yes, so we have the night court about every other month. Right now, we're having to adjust some of our scheduling, but it has been successful. We serve anywhere from 50 to 80 people. at our evening sessions, and even on the Saturday docket. We had it once, and we had about 85 people, I think, that appeared total. So it was a success. We are finding more people coming in because our normal docket is at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. They aren't able to take off work, and so this helps to serve people that typically can't come in during our business hours.
Thank you very much for doing that.
No problem.
The only thing I'll briefly add too is that it wasn't verbalized in this fashion, but the code enforcement cases that we're talking about that we could have more influence over if we were a court of record, that's community beautification, right? And it's in our comprehensive plan that we strive to have a beautiful community. And at the end of the day, code enforcement plays a big role in that. And so it's important that we continue to explore ways that we can enhance our community. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I also think that court of record also allows us the ability to also follow through in greater detail with animal control related cases.
Yes
You
and
don't have to
no.
figure that out now.
Yeah, and like,
In any case, thank you.
Good job.
and I'm done, that's it.
Okay. Is that about it?
Yes, sir, no executive session needed.
Well, I want to say some things briefly. Since late last week, I've been meeting with a lot of you for a lot of time. And I'm going to take my mayor's hat off right now. And I want to thank each and every one of our city employees, staff at every level for what you've done. And I'm thanking you as a citizen because you're protecting me and you're protecting my family and loved ones. And I'm going to put my mayor hat back on, which is over there, and tell you I'm damn proud of you. Because I have the easiest job in that basement every day. I really do. I have the easiest job. It's the wealth of information, the things that you bring to us when we have to make decisions that makes our job very easy. And I appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you. And with that.